You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Filthy slime.
I've read all your books, Mr. Deal. The book deals with a murder committed with an old-fashioned open razor, right? This girl, too, was killed with a razor, and your book's pages stuffed into her mouth.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on. Invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature Grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. And at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we are talking some high-octane action, specifically with one of my faves from the 90s, so join that sleaze.
Very true. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover as well. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are in. I actually have genuinely lost track. I was sixth year of bonus episodes. There's like 150 bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which we're getting pretty close to 60 of, where we talk about new release genre films. So that's 200 plus bonus episodes waiting for you over at patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for anyone who's interested. And since Jamie and I took a little bit of time off here so that he could go on tour with his band, we actually have a huge glut of shout outs to catch up on. So I'm going to try and go through these very quickly. We had Thomas Vincent sign up at $5 a month, Jack M, Tony Holt, oh my God, make this easier on me, Holznagel, Habibullah Khan, Misha Mraz, Wombat, Butts Raffle. Why did you make me read that? Cooper Hewitt, Mark Rickey, David Jones, Jim Bung, Chai Niu Ho, Hector Laidlaw, Jared Sarney, James McDermott, Brian Blake, who actually upgraded from $5 a month to $10 a month and joined us for our monthly virtual screening, which we try to do on the last Thursday of any given month, and joined us, I believe, for the John Waters polyester screening that we did last month, and which was a lot of fun. And Samuel McGuire and Sebastian Searinks also joined us at $10 a month for that. So thanks so much to those folks. We also had Sun Ra the Third sign up, Audrey SMs, Anna Whitholes, Caleb Cunningham, Vincent Miller, Jim Bung, Matt Robb, Asher Reisman, C.E. Jack Walker, Alexis Nelson, Tim Finley, believe it or not, we're still going, Andrew Lindberg, Rick Tracy, Jacob Feldman, David Seamus, EJ, Bruno Beretti, Poopty Pants, for the love of God.
Glad to have you here.
Six Snake, Justice Hainsworth, Dan Young, Tom Poynton, and a dog. Oh, this is actually it's kind of a tongue twister. I think it's meant to be Apocalypse Now, but it's a dog apocalypse now. Okay. I think that's what it is. Who's actually signed up at the annual tier for an entire year of the show in advance, which you can, if you're interested, get a little bit discounted rate monthly if you sign up that way. So, but that is everyone who signed up. Thanks so much for the support. That's a lot. We appreciate that very much. I hope you're enjoying all those bonus episodes.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. That's awesome.
That is the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, and I can see the stats, I can see you right now listening on both those platforms, give us a good old rating and a review over on those apps. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you can think of. And you folks have thought of a lot of things. You have bought coffee mugs, you've bought notebooks, you've bought pillows, you've bought hoodies, just a poster for your place. The link to that is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com for anyone who's interested. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the main feed would have heard from us, and we would have been joined by special guest documentary filmmaker Lance Oppenheim to discuss two films that inspired his latest HBO miniseries Ren Fair, which if you haven't seen it yet, I would highly recommend it. The guy
fantastic.
went into an actual Texas Renaissance festival and basically shot a real-life version of King Lear inside of it with all kinds of eccentric characters, and it was nice to pick his brain about both the show and also some of the style choices and inspirations for the show, which we did 2 weeks ago with a double feature of George Romero's very dorky and tender 2.5 hour long Hoxian community hangout melodrama about people who run a motorcycle gearhead version of a Renaissance fair called Night Riders from 1981, which was a shockingly personal and heartfelt movie, very much about George Romero in conversation with his own troupe of collaborators that he helped support, and yeah, we were surprised to be kind of crying at people jousting each other on motorcycles instead of horses, but that ended up happening with Lance last week.
Yeah,
2 weeks ago, sorry.
He cares so much about the characters in that movie. It's amazing that every single, not just the main ones like Ed Harris, but every single side character gets a good amount of time developing, and he just sits you in that world. It's really incredible. And then, of course, you have like 15-minute motorcycle action sequences where they're jousting. It's incredible. It's good stuff. Pure cinema.
Yes. And Lance happened to pair that with a little bit of an unexpected choice, Twilight Zone, the movie from 1983, which we were trying to figure out why exactly. We were like, does he just want to make us talk about the worst production history story of all time with him? It was a very mixed bag, cursed object style selection by our guest. It turned out, though, that the Joe Dante segment of that was actually a little bit of a character inspiration for him, about a bunch of characters who kind of bow down to another figure and how kind of creepy and kind of scary that is, and as a result, we also had to talk about the worst directing Steven Spielberg's ever done.
Yeah,
so
that was
it was a rough time, but it was worth it to get to the Joe Dante and George Miller stuff. And if you haven't heard that episode, that was 2 weeks ago over on the main feed with Lance. Go back and check it out, and please do check out Ren Fair as well. It's an incredible show.
Yeah, really, really good. And Sperm World is also really good, so check that out too.
Hell yeah. But last week over on the Patreon feed, we did a special episode just for the patrons where we were talking about one of the earlier examples of the buddy cop movie, as well as a star being born in the form of comedian Eddie Murphy. We did a double feature of the first two Beverly Hills Cop movies in conjunction with the sort of legacy sequel that they put out on Netflix, which I still haven't watched yet, but it's always a great excuse to go back and talk about some movies I do enjoy, which I did in this case, which was Martin Brest's Fish Out of Water, sort of street cop crime procedural movie that he made. That's really more of a charming and relaxed, like, buddy hangout movie. And then the Tony Scott sequel 3 years later, which was after the first one was such a massive hit and Eddie Murphy was such a sensation, which is a lot cruder and a lot more over stylized in a very post Top Gun, post Miami Vice kind of macho action movie way. But definitely immediately you get Tony Scott fever watching that.
Yeah. And honestly, I thought the way that Beverly Hills Cop 2 is directed is what I thought the entire series was more like before I watched them, because this was the first time I saw them. But yeah, that first one is really more of a hangout movie, and it really takes its time again to develop the Axel character, which I wasn't expecting. I thought it was just going to be pure quips and pure action, kind of like the second one is. So yeah, it was cool to see the different styles.
Beverly Hills Cop 2 is Tony Scott's Michael Bay movie, as we kind of talked about at length
Bad Boys.
During that one. It's very proto Bad Boys. So you haven't heard that episode, that was patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast 2 weeks ago, or last week, sorry, for anyone who's interested. But moving along to this week, we are joined by not one but two very special guests this week. They are both incredible freelance film critics and researchers and authors. whose collective bylines include the Village Voice, the Criterion Collection, Mubi, Film Comment, Vulture, Reverse Shot, and many, many others, and who together used to run a very insightful series of transcribed conversations I used to follow called Body Talk. And I was excited to learn recently that they have turned that series into a fantastic new book they released this week called Corpses, Fools, and Monsters, The History and Future of Transness in Cinema. Those guests are Willow, Maclay, and Caden Gardner. How are you both doing? Welcome to the show.
Good. We're really excited. Our book came out yesterday. I'm not sure when exactly this episode is going to drop, but we've been kind of having this whirlwind experience of
only a couple days later. I'm sure you guys will both still be in it and in the thick of it and receiving messages nonstop about how good it is.
Yeah, we have a series playing at the Museum of the Moving Image in New York in a couple of days. So like this is just going to keep going and going and going, at least for the next couple months. And correct me if I'm wrong, you have a Toronto show too for any local listeners for our show here, right? Yeah, yes, we're both going to be at the Paradise Theater at the end of the month, July 28th, I believe. We're going to screen Ginger Snaps. We're going to introduce the film, and
amazing film too.
And we're going to be there signing books. So if you have a book, bring it along. We'll sign it, and there will be books there to purchase as well if you want to get in on the action there.
That's
awesome.
and just to be clear, due to some sort of situations out of our control, I'll be able to travel across the greater United States and into Canada, but the Toronto event, Willow being able to sign the books is going to make that a rarity. So you're not just getting both of our signatures, you might be the only group of people who will be getting both of our signatures for that event.
Yeah,
so
I'm not going to be in the United States.
Yeah, and for the better, I think, as far as what the hell is going on down here. But
it seems bad, Caden.
Yes, it is. But I do want to incentivize I do want to incentivize the Toronto event for the signings, and also talking about a screening of a film that's not a direct representational trans movie, but definitely a movie that both of us do sort of come from a place of this is transcoding.
Hell yeah. Well, I would definitely recommend doing that. If I can make it, I will absolutely be there. So go to the Toronto screening of Ginger Snaps. We've also covered Ginger Snaps on this show, so we can't highly recommend the film enough either, even if you haven't seen it. Now, Willow and Caden, though. I have got my book today, and I have been reading as much as I could as my boss would let me while I was at work today. So far, from what I've read, I have been very much loving it and can't recommend it enough. But I also noticed very early on that you both mentioned that, that this book is not a canonization or a decanonization, and it doesn't cover everything about the trans image in film. But from what I've been reading so far, it's incredibly comprehensive. It goes from the earliest representations in silent film to the Christine Jorgensen story, which we've talked about on this show just because we covered Ed Wood's Glen or Glenda. There's some 60s and 70s exploitation filmmakers like Andy Warhol and Doris Wishman, who we've talked about. You obviously get into some of the big ones in the 70s and 80s, things like Dog Day Afternoon and Rocky Horror and John Waters and Divine. And you go all the way into the stuff I think people kind of expect of the book, the more troubling sort of post-psycho killer depictions, things like Dress to Kill and Sleepaway Camp. And obviously as well, more transcoded things, which we've talked about a ton on this show with body horror and transformation and AI and robots, all kinds of movies that bring up this subject. But was it just Body Talk that inspired the both of you to do this? Like where was this born from? What was the time you both said we are writing a book?
We actually had kind of a happy accident happen with Body Talk, where one of our readers was Carl Neville, who works at Repeater Publishing, who got in touch with us and was like, this Body Talk series is really fascinating. I think that you could turn it into a book, perhaps. So it just kind of rolled from there, where we started talking about it more seriously, and we we went into the deep end of this pretty early, and we realized we might have bit off more than we could chew at times. But like, there's never really been a book written like this before, as far as we can tell, and we're really proud at the canvas that we have created for this book. It's really huge, and it all started with Body Talk. Yes.
Yeah. Like, I was looking back at when we started, and sometimes I can't believe it was just 6 years ago when we went on this endeavor. But I do remember we had this sort of goal in mind that maybe we can turn this into a book, but in many ways, we almost had to prove it to ourselves. Like, we had been friends for years up until that point through social media, but being able to write and kind of agree on titles and also have these sort of dialogues of sort of challenging what these films are, what they mean, was something that we wanted to really try in earnest and see where we could go from there. And it seemed to correspond with a lot more of an uptick in movies that were just being made due to more trans filmmakers that were on our radar, as well as discovering older titles that were basically being restored or were being found that were also broadening the sort of scope and canvas that we had, that we basically ultimately put in this final text. There's obviously some films that we weren't able to include, and films that I hope maybe in maybe some future edition of the book we could include. We initially wanted to do something that was sort of in the style of Vito Russo's The Celluloid Closet, although I would say we're not really so much activists as Russo is, but more cinephiles. But I thought with what we were able to pull off was pretty intense, especially considering all the sort of issues and sort of dialogues we have with not just trans depictions in film, but also just a broader history that's admittedly more tied to the American history of trans people, but I still thought that was something that had to be included in telling the story for this book.
Yeah, no, I mean it's spectacular so far, and I was kind of overwhelmed at the amount of subjects and the amount of titles and the amount of sort of digressions that you guys managed to pull off. And I liked that you bring up that obviously there was some stuff that had to be cut, and you're hoping to do some extra features. Might that have anything to do with the double feature that the both of you have decided to bring on here? Because I will confess, part of my interest in picking up the book was like, I wonder if they have, I immediately went back to the index and I was like, are either of the films that we're talking about on the episode with them in the book at all? Maybe I should do my due diligence and see what they have to say. And they were not in there, and I was a little shocked right away. So, but maybe you can explain that story. So what two films are we talking about today, and why did you decide this was the pairing that you wanted to bring on the show?
With our book, we had such a wide canvas. We had this really good problem of there being too many examples of transness on film for us to actually talk about every single one of them in a concise manner and tying it all together in a very appealing sort of way. And one of the figures we had to cut out of the book because we couldn't figure out a way to place her within the broader context of the scene without it being a digression that pulled away from our argument, was the actress Eva Robin, who is in both of the films that we are going to be discussing today. And those are Dario Argento's Tenebrae, which I'm sure your viewers have heard of, and the Italian softcore porn film Eva Man, Two Sexes in One, which I'm less sure that they've heard of.
Yeah, I think it's less than 100
so.
entries on Letterboxd or something like that, which we always love to see on this show.
I always love anytime I have to message a guest and I'm like, is this the best copy I'm watching? Do either of you have a better one? It's just a great question to have to ask, I think.
Are subtitles available?
Yeah.
And I have to admit, the first time I ever encountered that film might have been on a porn site, so yeah.
Just stumbled upon it, huh?
It's a preservation, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I was able to watch Friedkin's Cruising for the first time, so I'm not... so again, can't complain about the source, and that's also how I've watched a lot more... not officially pornographic, not even quite softcore, but more art house films where you basically either see a lot of TNA or dick and balls, essentially.
Yeah, we had to ask ourselves this question very early on, where we had to say, do we want to include softcore pornography? Because there's a lot of trans softcore pornography that kind of like veers into exploitation films sometimes. Like, we're going to talk about Eva Robin and we're going to talk about Agita Wilson, and you know, we get into these directors like Jess Franco that worked in that mode and the Black Emmanuel movies with Agita Wilson, but like we decided not to have that in the book so much, just for the sake of if we were to have actually covered that subject, it would have opened up a whole can of worms.
Yeah, because then we would have also gotten, because the book is so much about trans authorship, and we've been in these sort of discussions before about the sort of history of trans authorship, where I have to say, like, we're not really... I hope no one looks at our book and is trying to locate us making these proclamations of this is the first or this is the second or whatever, because I feel like early on we do sort of challenge the sort of history of how things have been told before, and it would be misplaced for us to also then assert that same type of logic. Because trans history can sometimes be muddled due to the fact that all of it is a lot of personal history that is often purposely meant not to be found. But basically, our conversations with, say, the porn performer Carter Mornier, she has sort of talked about how trans people in the porn space have been sort of leading the way as offered filmmakers of presenting their bodies, presenting these trans bodies as objects of desire, but also on their own terms in ways that differ from the more sort of problematic history. Although even based on my own sort of independent research on trans pornography, I should note even the ones in that would be just simply labeled fetish were often directed by trans performers as well. So it's always an interesting topic, but unfortunately we couldn't include that in the book because it's one of those things where it's a whole rabbit hole. Like even just going
it would make it really unwieldy, and there's so much more research and history. Yeah, I totally understand. Well, we are perfectly happy being a little bit of an extended bonus feature for anyone who has just finished the book to come and check out, because we are about to have that conversation a little bit here, because we are going to be we're going to be talking about EVA Man, I think, first here, so that we can actually get into the history of Eva Robin and Agita Wilson, and definitely talk about that kind of space for trans performers. And then we're going to get into, afterward, we're going to talk about Tenebrae, and we're going to talk about how Eva ended up getting her way into a Dario Argento film, and not only that, into a very striking, important role in a Dario Argento film, which maybe isn't the largest role, but it is a very, very important one, and very much weaponizes her image and the way that she treats the man and the killer centered in the Dario Argento movie, which, if you're to take the reading as at face value, is partially meant to be him a little bit. Right. So I'm excited to talk about that. But before we get into that, we're going to start off here. We're going to talk about EVA Man, Two Sexes in One. All right, we are talking Eva Man, Two Sexes in One, the 1980 Italian softcore porno / sort of sexploitation crime movie, a little bit, written and directed by Antonio Justino, and starring trans actress Eva Robin as Eva, who alongside fellow trans actress Ajita Wilson are essentially go through a series of hangout scenes, confidently owning their bodies and having fun dancing and drinking and jumping into pools in slow motion with big smiles on their faces, while a bunch of mustached cisgender Italian men either clinically study them for their sexual energy, or that seems to be able to hypnotize people or just really attracts people, or a bunch of criminals who are so envious of their beauty that they try to steal and harness it for themselves. Willow might be able to help us here with coming up with what this what exactly the log line is here, because there is conflicting reports, and I don't know that we have anyone who's Italian who's just watched it and confirmed what the dialogue of the movie is.
To our dear Italian listeners, if this is wrong, please inform us if it is wrong. There are two plots available in English on Letterboxd and IMDb, and they're not totally consistent. Okay, here is the plot on IMDb. Professor Popov invented a microvibrator able to eliminate all forms of hate. The scientist inserts the prototype of his machine into his niece and assistant Eva, a young intersex woman, who must go through a number of situations to test the equipment. At one point, a local gangster abducts Eva to appropriate the machine, but he is really in cahoots with Popov. Eva and her friend Ajita manage to fight the robbers and preserve the invention. But here is where Letterboxd inserts something somewhat confusing. Beautiful Eva, hermaphrodite from birth, so we're not totally sure on the language, with clear signs of both sexes under the strict guidance of her uncle, masters the secrets of sexual energy, which give the possibility of a Superman, but an angry...
Yeah, this is where I got confused, because I announced that we were possibly talking about a trans superhero movie when I was looking at this description, and that was not what the movie was. But keep going.
There's one scene later that maybe suggests that, but anyway, this is the rest of the plot. But an angry gangster steals it with the help of a doctor villain to move into the body of Eve and take over the world. He tries to prevent his rival, who is going to deprive the girl of her masculinity and thus not to let her turn into Superman. So... Wow. There's some broken English there, I think, but...
There's a gangster involved in both, so I'm glad we got to the bottom
consistent.
of that.
So the gangsters are concrete. We are aware of that much. But I honestly think that your description, Josh, of Ajita Wilson and Eva Robin hanging out at a poolside with mustached Italian men staring at them, having sex with them, just playing around is like a better plot description than both of those.
That was what I gathered from watching this anyway, without subtitles, without being able to understand what anyone was saying. It's actually the second time in the history of the show that we have done this, because Peter Labuza once brought on a Spanish noir film that was so underseen and unavailable that there were not subtitles either. Though we were glad, I guess, in the case of that it was a Mexican sort of like noir genre. Mm-hmm. So the imagery was actually telling a lot of story, just in terms of camera placement and, you know, in terms of movement and everything like that. This one is obviously more done in the sort of softcore sexploitation scene. So, you know, not quite playing with shadow in the same way to convey character experience or anything. But there is there is a plot to follow, and I did have some some fun trying to keep track of it. And a large portion of the film, though, is really just centered on Eva Robin's, the transgender Italian actress from Italy, who we'll obviously talk about again next, who ended up in a Dario Argento film, and also in the Lou Ferrigno Hercules movies, which I've never seen, but I'm very curious to check out what her role in those are.
Yeah.
But maybe Willow and Caden, you could walk us through Eva's story a little bit, because this is, from what we could see, this was her second on-screen appearance. And how did she end up in a Italian softcore porno movie?
So she was an actress and a model prior to this. She was considered one of the most beautiful women in all of Italy. She was actually voted the second most beautiful woman in Italy at one point, which is interesting. I don't have a great source to back that up or anything, because trying to get information on Italian, Maxim magazine type discussions of things like that is a little difficult. But she was this beautiful young woman in Italy who was open about her transsexuality, and I think that because she was open about her transsexuality, she kind of became this fetish object in Italy, where she found herself into film slightly because of what they perceived as a contradiction in her sex and her beauty. I think that directors found it fascinating, and we'll get into that a little bit with Argento later. But I think in the case of Eva Man, I think that she's in this film because I honestly think that the film might be based around her entire identity, because the plot seems to revolve around the facts of her biology. It seems to follow, like, what exactly her body constitutes, and then the rest of the film kind of is filled in around just the question of a beautiful transsexual woman. And I think that the film gets into some really fascinating points of, like in a modernist lens. I think that the film is really interesting to look at. At the time, Agita Wilson was closeted. No one knew that she was trans when this film was being made. Everyone assumed that she was a cis woman, and she was not open about her trans status. But we have this film of two trans women who are kind of in a romantic situation with each other, and it's kind of beautiful that we don't know much about the plot, because instead we can kind of just sit back and experience just the full totality of their bodies, their gestures, their experiences, how they're reacting to one another, without a question of language getting in the way. Mm-hmm. And I've always found that fascinating about this movie.
Yeah, and we kind of obviously have sort of talked about this as a sort of unofficial trans buddy movie, even though obviously Wilson was stealth. And basically she is an American, but basically went to Italy to model, and then obviously became a sort of staple in exploitation films. And it's really fascinating to sort of see how, and we often see this when I was doing research of major trans people at the time, even beyond Jorgensen. I'm talking about Bambi, the showgirl, Cochinelle, people like that who basically went in different directions of being open about who they were, but you also had people who were trans but stealth about it, and also basically trying to move up in the world. And Europe offered some very interesting opportunities for many people, and we often did see trans women basically become American expats, because they basically had a more interesting time to sort of turn a new leaf in a various European country. Although I'm not as familiar as far as what the opportunities were in Italy, and Willow sort of noted the sort of gawking that Robbins had when she came out. But it's sort of interesting to sort of see these two trans women from completely different circumstances and have a completely different relationship with celebrity and their trans status. It's Will and I have sort of talked about how, whether it's Candy Darling, Holly Woodlawn, or how these people who have sort of become embraced by the trans community in deaf, how they would necessarily feel about their trans status sort of being the lead on that, because I do see often that Ajita Wilson gets sort of honors for that, even though, as Will mentioned, she was stealth. And unfortunately, she died young in a car accident, I believe, so she was never really able to sort of age into maybe perhaps being more open. There was this trans actress named Alicia Brevard, who's American, and it's interesting you talk about a trans superhero movie. She actually did play a superhero on a television show. I forget what the character was off the top of my head, but she had a lot of Hollywood credits. It wasn't until she was retired and well into old age that she actually came out trans much later, when she put out her memoir, and she later passed. But it's kind of interesting to sort of see how trans people from this time period just had a relationship to being trans and sort of the trade-off of that celebrity, or if you're an Ajita Wilson, you're stealth and you're able to enter these refined spaces and new opportunities that you might not have elsewhere. But again, you're also hiding a part of yourself. And I'm not sure how she would necessarily feel about being labeled a trans icon, but it's always interesting to kind of think of the what if with her, because obviously she didn't get the opportunity, much like Candy Darling didn't get the opportunity.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the part of what you're mentioning there too that kind of struck me watching this, and I imagine something you both have to think about a lot when you watch a movie like this, is especially in this era, I imagine as well. But like, you know, how does the camera view these two actresses? Because obviously the camera kind of views them a little differently. Eva is very out and very proud and very open about obviously being a trans performer, and Ajita is not, and that's a distinction that you've made clear happened in their actual lives as well. And the movie obviously pairs them together as two women who are going to, you know, we're introduced to them having sex with one another due to what they're calling the professor, who is like the head of the clinic, who kind of looks like Lucio Fulci if he was wearing like a lab coat back when he was a med student, and he's the one sort of like organizing this you know sort of study that they are doing of these two women, and then they spend the rest of the movie kind of hanging out by the pool, having some drinks and jumping into it in slow motion and kind of dancing around. And there are some moments, I would say, in the film where they do try to, I think, gawk a little bit at obviously the distinction between Eva and Ajita, especially when they first introduce Eva. But then sort of later in the film, there's something interesting in how they kind of get blended together and that they're shot very similarly. It's just two beautiful women in a pool, and they kind of, one of my favorite things about how they end up sort of distinguishing that is they throw in the classic sort of voyeuristic, creepy Italian men characters with binoculars just kind of spying on both of them, and just kind of in equal measure, and being like, wow, look at these beautiful naked women just having a great time in a pool in slow motion. And it's one of those things that you would imagine this scene would have been shot the exact same way if it was just, if it was cis women as well in 1970s Italy. And I thought that was a very interesting kind of energy that the film had between the two, especially just because Eva is a character who, you know, both as a performer and both also as a character is someone who is just very, very in touch with their body and showing it off and the confidence with it. I mean, this movie opens and closes on Eva doing disco dancing to an incredible song called Disco Panther as the closing one. And she's so athletic and sweaty, and there's lights going everywhere, and everyone is just kind of overwhelmed by her. And I think that's like kind of part of where the power of the movie is Eva owning her own image as a performer, and also the character being incredibly striking to every single person who has their eyes fall on her.
I think that this movie would actually be far less interesting if Eva Robin didn't like just love being on camera. She gorges on the camera. She loves being looked at. She loves being perceived. She in this movie, you get the sense that if she had been born in a different time, she would have been a major star in some other avenue of visibility, whether that be like through the internet or as a model in more enlightened times, or just even if she had been given a few more opportunities in exploitation films, her legend would have been much more than it was, because she loves being on the camera and the camera loves her, I think, which is not something that you can teach actors. It's just one of those things. And I think even without knowing what's going on in this movie, your eye is sort of pulled to whatever Eva is doing. And we'll get into it later, but I think that Dario Argento understood that too. Like he knew,
absolutely,
he knew what she was, you know. And I think that this film has kind of become a minor classic of vibes among trans cinephiles who watch way too many movies, who have access to way too many public tracker torrent sites, or private tracker torrent sites, God. And it's one of those movies where, like, oh, have you seen EVA MAN? It's wonderful. It's about nothing, and it's just two trans women hanging out. But I think the movie also accidentally kind of plays in with this great lineage of trans film images, because I think that the insertion of the professor scientist character is not that different from the medical documentaries that they were making in the 70s, and going all the way back to Glenn or Glenda, and going all the way back to Frankenstein, which transgender theorist Susan Stryker famously said that trans people can relate to Frankenstein's monster because God didn't make us, science did. So this film is in conversation with that unconsciously as well.
Yeah, and also just the general sort of exhibitionism of it, just them being watched. Obviously, Let Me Die a Woman is a major one, because also that's probably the film that comes closest to being outright pornography that we talk about, where you actually have a sex scene with the adult film star Harry Reams with a trans woman. And also, I also think of the opening scene in Myra Breckenridge, where Myra's trans surgery is basically being watched by people with binoculars, essentially, as if they're watching a football game, almost. And it's one of those, like, again, unconscious commentaries of the sort of uniqueness and gawking nature and salaciousness that's often tied to trans women and trans feminine sexuality.
Well, I was struck, I would say, like, watching this for the first time, I was definitely struck immediately just by the level of what Willow was talking about, of Eva, the level of pleasure and confidence she clearly just takes in being able to command the screen. And it's such an important part of the movie, because I think if the actress did not have this, I don't think that I would have been able to follow this movie at all. Because I think that's what you have to kind of assume, is that so many of the characters that she's running into in these various Italian men are in some capacity just being dazed and just being like, what am I, like, this is amazing, what am I, and there's a kind of freewheeling quality to the movie where her spirit just starts generating all of this, like, mayhem. And I was especially shocked that, because you go into, once I figured out it was a softcore movie, I was like, okay, there's going to be a couple of sex scenes here, but I wasn't expecting the precise situations in which they occurred, which is like a maid comes in and she's just like, Eva decides, I'm going to have sex with this woman. I'm going to, and briefly they have a conversation about it once she finds out that Eva is trans, and they go back to it, and it turns into this whole slapstick scenario where the gangster and the guys who are spying on them come back to kidnap Eva. Eva, and it's this whole sequence where it's actually just the absolute like dazed post-coital maid is in the bed. So when the gangsters come to steal Eva, they end up just stealing this maid and loading her up into the back of their car and driving her all the way back to their lair, and they unwrap her in the sheet and they're like, well, we got the wrong woman. We did not get the trans woman that we were all talking about, and that I couldn't quite figure out what exactly they wanted to do with her. Again, I was kind of going off the log line. Are they trying to get some sexual energy, or are they trying to get some sort of chip that the person has put into her?
I have a theory.
But it ends up... Oh, go ahead. I want to hear it.
I have a theory. I think that they worship Eva Robin's penis, and they want it for themselves, and they want to take the vibrator that the professor inserted in her and insert it in themselves so they can have sex with whoever they want to. Because Eva has this that
makes sense.
Yeah, I've seen the film 3 times. I feel like Charlie.
This is what you have to do. This is Eva scholarship.
Yeah, like I have like a cork board. I have the clues. I'm figuring out every piece of this movie. So I think that's what they're going for, and I think that's why they kind of want to give her a kind of like very sloppy sex change operation at the end of the movie.
Yeah, that was the part where I got confused about the first time, but your reading makes a lot of sense now if you include that element of it, because I was like, there's a guy in the corner of the room sharpening an axe while they've kidnapped her in a warehouse, and I was very distressed for a little while.
And that was before the doctor gets there to do this, try to do the same thing, but with a knife. So it seems everyone is after Eva at that point.
Yeah, and I can safely say I've never seen another movie where like a cis man is like, I need to steal this trans woman's dick. Like that's new. That's new territory. I kind of have a rule with exploitation movies where I'm like, show me something I haven't seen before, and usually the people that end up doing that for me are like Joe D'Amato or Bruno Mattei, because they should both be in prison probably. But like, but you know, like this movie also showed me something I haven't seen before when I saw it many years ago.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, trying to track down what exactly happened in the third act is kind of like trying to figure out the exposition at the end of the William Castle Psycho ripoff Homicidal, and trying to figure out, wait, how did they transition? Wait, to transition to what? But yeah, I think Willow has figured it out. BFI Classic should commission her to write the book on Eva Man.
I would start it quoting Lady Gaga. She has that song where she said, "I don't speak German, but I can if you like." I would start it out with, "I don't speak Italian, but I can if you like."
Yeah. No, I was quite shocked when it pivoted towards the crime aspect of the movie, because I was not expecting, there to be stakeouts and 2 different forces all being like, how do we acquire this trans woman's penis? Do we do it by force? Do we do it? I don't understand, but they're all fixated by it, and they are all chasing it in some capacity. And that's where the one element that we kind of referred to at the beginning maybe comes into place with the superhero element, where it does end up resulting in Eva just straight up strong arming her way out of that situation, ripping through her binds, jumping across the warehouse, punching the shit out of people, throwing martial arts kicks. And I was like, this is not at all where I expected this movie to go. But at that point, I'll admit, I was very much enjoying myself, and especially enjoying the Eva Robin's performance, which I think is kind of, without how striking she is, I don't think that you would necessarily buy the plot of it, especially wordlessly. And weirdly enough, I felt like I kind of understood on some level by the time I got to the end, and she was just being like, yeah she is the most confident and physical woman in the world, and I absolutely understand that she could just break her way out of there and kick everyone's ass.
Yeah,
right. Like Eva Robin's in this movie is kind of a universal language. Which is why when we were talking about it, I said, like, I don't think you actually need subtitles to understand this, because the whole movie is just fluctuating through her body, her kooky gestures, her sexuality. I think she even complicates the male gaze. I think that the camera starts at a gawking position, but eventually she kind of just takes it on herself, where like it feels like she's in control of the image in this strange way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I even like I thought it was amazing too, just for like, again, we were talking about her confidence. It takes so much confidence to pull off that kind of Bruce Lee energy that she's channeling at the very end. Even before she starts kicking and punching, they have this awesome kind of close up of like her getting angrier and angrier and the ropes getting looser and looser until she breaks free and does the whole like monkey bar swing into a kick. It's just incredible, and it's because they've done such a great job, and I mean Eva's done such a great job of just showing you that confidence and showing you that you know, there's not a moment in this where she comes off as like a weak character. Anytime that she's in trouble, it still feels like she's fighting back in every sense of the word. And it goes right to the beginning. Like her coming out of that dance is, I believe, her coming out of like it's kind of like a paper wall of sorts, and she bursts through it just for an extra kind of oomph to the performance that she's about to give.
She's like a pro wrestler.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, exactly. It's pure. She's a pure performer, and it's cool to see her channel that in different ways throughout the film.
And the dancing is great too, honestly, in that whole sequence.
And what's cool about the dancing is that it's like some of it is really pretty and great, and then some of it she just kind of gets like kind of silly with it, and still has that big smile on her face and pure confidence with it, and it's just it's incredibly captivating. She's an amazing performer.
She's so charming when she dances, because I don't think she's not like classically beautiful in what she's doing with her dancing or anything. She doesn't have amazing rhythm, but she has a rhythm that feels like it belongs to her, and she's very confident with it. She just
makes it up in energy.
Exactly. Like she's so. I think the reason why trans people love this movie is just because she's so comfortable in her body, in the sex scenes, in the acting, in the action, in her dancing, in the comedy. It's just, she's wonderful.
Yeah, a natural star. And I love too, like she starts lip syncing the song at the very end where she's on the piano. And
that's
again,
the greatest song ever, by the way. If anyone can locate that song for us, we did have a commenter reach out saying that they got to see this film on a 35mm print just a year or so ago, and they so loved the Disco Panther song that she dances to at the end. And we were telling Jamie before we started recording to throw it at the beginning, so you might have already heard it. But now we need to locate the record, because we have found out that the record is out there, and yeah, Eva dances her ass off to it in the full white outfit and like heels on the piano and everything too. Man,
she's like humping the bar at one point, but kind of like smirking about it and everything. She's very playful. It's great.
Actually, what links these two movies together is not just Eva Robin's. It's a banger Italian disco soundtrack.
Definitely.
Yeah, and the heels. I didn't even think about that either. She's rocking those in both too. Let's go.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, honestly. I just didn't know what to expect when I was told we were watching a porno with no subtitles. I was just like, here we go, you know?
From Italy.
So, yeah. So I was like, whatever happens, and I had a great time, honestly. It was way more fun than I thought it would be. I thought it was just going to be more, you know, just kind of meandering between the dialogue scenes into the sex scenes, and you know, there'd be like one or two exploitation moments, but honestly, it was a surprisingly good hangout movie in a sense.
Yeah, our friend Adam Naiman actually blurbed our book and said that Corpses, Fools, and Monsters was so great because Caden and I have a deep love for cinema and a polymorphous cinephilia. But if we had found a way to get this movie into the book, that would have brought an entirely new definition to the word, because, you know, like very few people have seen this movie, and it's you kind of have to go to some of the more hidden parts of the internet to watch it. I've been posting a little bit about it on Instagram in the last week or so, trying to very casually mention I was going to be talking about this movie without talking about this movie. And I've had like a dozen people message me like, oh my God, how do I watch this movie? And it's like, well, it's
hard.
It's a little complex.
We need to phone our friend Liz to see if this is some endeavor she wants to get herself into. as far as restoration, a sub version, but also a version without subs, so that you can have the full Eva Man experience.
Yeah, we were talking about that a little bit before recording too, and we were like, how badly do we want subs to this movie? Does it feel like it's a perfect, charming dream only because we have no idea what these Italian people are saying?
Right.
Would we go, this is a horrible movie and I hate all these men, if we could understand a word that they were saying? It's very possible.
Right.
But,
it opens up this theoretical idea that Caden and I have talked about a little bit and leading up to this conversation, is like, are old movies about transness better if we actually don't know what anyone is saying? Because there's nothing offensive about this movie as it exists right now, but if we knew everything about it, like would it tarnish it in some way? It's just you know, and bringing it back to Caden talking about our friend Elizabeth Purchell. If our book really takes off and there's some sort of Corpses, Fools, and Monsters box set someday, I want Eva Man to be like the first film in it, honestly.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, that'd be great. Well, I thank both of you very much for letting us be part of this and part of the under 100 club of people who have logged this on Letterboxd and let alone talked about it. It was quite something special, and we are, I think, going to wrap it up on this one here, though, and enter the reductive rating round, which is where we remove all the words and all the nuances and give the movie a rating between 1 and 5. And it's also become any final statements or any final, maybe there was a line or a scene we didn't mention that we always like to kind of give a chance to bring up right at the end. Luckily, this was a fairly bare bones experience, being being watched by 4 English speakers who were watching an Italian film without subtitles, but this ended up getting a very solid 3 for me. I found it very enjoyable, and as enjoying it as a silent film, just essentially for Eva Robin's dancing and smiling and jumping in slow motion, partially to a disco soundtrack, partially to just all kinds of characters absolutely hypnotized by her and her confidence and her beauty. It was a very striking movie to watch, and you know, we've talked a lot about her performance, but it really is the kind of the centerpiece of the movie. I think without the performance and how physical she is, it doesn't make any sense at all. And as is, I felt like I understood way more of it than I should have. Both the fact that everyone around her is just absolutely dazed anytime they catch a glimpse of her, and also that she could absolutely beat the shit out of everyone who wants to steal her penis from her, which was an incredible way to end the movie. And I was you know, I found this very, very enjoyable for the little bit of it that I could understand, and a huge part of that is just purely on physical performance and hangout vibes. So I'm also gonna give it a 3. I thought it was I just like I said before, I just didn't know what to expect, and I ended up having a really good time. I loved that Eva's confidence throughout the entire thing. Like, she was just incredibly captivating from the moment she burst through that wall. She's just a complete star. It's amazing. And also Ajita Wilson is also really good. Doesn't get as much screen time, but she has a very similar presence as Eva when she is on screen. And bringing that confidence and then channeling it into like a kung fu Bruce Lee scene at the end, taking revenge on the bad people, is just incredible. I really didn't see that coming. Just given that I will say they have way more beautiful sex together than that opening heterosexual Italian couple, which is the most disturbing thrusting and grabbing I think I've ever seen that they're watching. Yeah, it's a very different vibe.
I almost forgot about that, the way they edit it too.
I forgot that too. I want to just bring that up at the end while we're bringing up things we maybe didn't mention.
Yeah, it just gets faster and faster, and I think they even put it in like fast motion at a certain point, so the thrusting is just that much more aggressive. Yeah, totally agree. And I really liked the I think there's a couple scenes, but the 2 that stand out to me are the kind of like the scenes of acceptance when Eva goes to have sex with people and they don't know that she's trans, and then they have a moment in the conversation, and then there's an acceptance of it, and then they have the scene. To put that into the pornography, I think is
well. Then they realize it's the best sex they're about to have in their life.
Yeah.
I think
they're so exhausted that you can get kidnapped after it, not even notice. So I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
So I think there's a surprising amount of really amazing moments in this, and it would be interesting to see it translated, but who knows if that's a risky thing. So we'll see, maybe one day. But yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, for both of you.
I'm going to give the film 4 red stiletto heels out of 5.
Excellent.
To foreshadow our next film. I find this movie so hard to rate. I've stopped rating movies on Letterboxd just because I've come
That's
to.
fair.
It just takes over so much of my thought process when I'm thinking about a movie. I'm like, oh, so what number should I put on this? It's like, isn't that I watched it enough and gave it 2 hours of my life or whatever? Like a clear declaration.
Even that I've watched it
support.
3 times and I'm the only person who knows the plot of it.
That's true. I am an expert on this film, maybe. So yeah, I'll do the whole 4 out of 5 thing because it's not exactly the red shoes, but
it's the red. It's Tenebrae is more of the red stilettos, but this is kind of close.
Yeah, can I ask both of you one question?
Yeah.
Have either of you seen Jess Franco's Macumba Sexual?
No. I haven't.
Okay, that film stars Ajita Wilson as an ancient sex goddess, and she kind of hypnotizes the movie with her screen presence and power in the same way that Eva Robin does in this film. But the difference between that film and this film is Ajita Wilson kind of pulls the film in kind of a lethargic, hypnotic crawl where you feel like you're kind of being pulled into an abyss. And I think that part of that is due to the fact that Jess Franco doesn't really know what he's doing. So like he's directing and he doesn't really know how to direct his way out of the film because he made like 200 movies or something. But like it's one of my favorite Jess Franco movies, and it's one of my favorite performances by a trans person because she's just this 6 foot tall monument, and she's treated like the most powerful being on earth. And
I'm loving the character name I'm seeing here. Princess Obongo, the goddess of unspeakable lust.
Let's go.
Yes.
Credited character name.
Watch list.
It's also a softcore film. But like Franco's more perverse than this director. I'm blanking on their name. You know, like I would recommend doing that one somewhere down the line on this podcast.
And I believe the director of this film also went by Richard Bennett, and I'm not sure if that's a pseudonym to get work in Hollywood or if the D'Agostino name is just something he used to get work in Italy. Who knows? I've never seen the director of this film's other work, so it's fascinating. As far as my rating, 4 Disco Panthers out of 5. I also want to credit this film for upending common trans film stereotypes. I usually in such a sort of perverted film like this, the trans woman's usually the maid, and instead the maid is the one who gets down with the trans woman. So good on this movie. Good on this movie.
All right, that is, I think, going to wrap it up here for Eva Man, 2 Sexes in 1. We are going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about Eva Robin's and her short appearance in the middle of Dario Argento's return to the Giallo genre. Stick around.
Must be the truth.
All right, we are back, and we are talking about Tenebrae or Tenebrah. There's multiple spellings of this one here. The on-screen, though, I'm going to go with Tenebrae, which I don't actually think is the Latin or Italian term. I don't know if that's the correct spelling for it, but it is supposed to mean darkness or shadows. It is the 1982 Italian Giallo film written and directed by Dario Argento and starring Anthony Franciosa as the American novelist Peter Neal, who alongside his assistant and agent and various other detectives who get involved investigate a string of serial murders that may or may not be the work of a psycho-obsessed fan copycat killer inspired by one of his hit murder mystery novels. This is our fifth time, I believe, actually covering Italian horror legend Dario Argento, having previously covered his formerly accomplished brand of surreal and atmospheric and disorienting sort of nightmare set pieces featuring all kinds of neon gel colors and goblin prog rock and supernatural evil hiding beneath architecture is a pretty consistent idea running through. We've obviously talked about his masterpiece about witches who run a German dance academy in Suspiria. We've covered Inferno, which takes the bizarre dream logic made famous in Suspiria to some pretty inscrutable degrees, but is like no less impressive in terms of the slow burn anticipation and the actual filmmaking. We've done Phenomena, which was a bit of a greatest hits project for him almost, where he was reusing the school setting. He was, doing the different escalating layers of like strangely surreal sort of shock set pieces. He also threw in some like monkeys and Donald Pleasance and telepathic metal. Insects and Iron Maiden, of course. Go. Jamie he was not about to let me finish that without throwing that one in there.
I had to throw it
I fucking love Iron Maiden.
Yes.
We do too. There was a lot of love for Iron Maiden on that episode when we talked about it. We were like, we don't know if it totally makes sense, but we love that it's here.
I love, all of a sudden there's a chase sequence. You'd think that there'd just be a creepy synth, and instead it's just like pure metal riffage going on in the background.
You're like, all right, let's go.
I loved it.
It's Flash of the Blade, isn't it? Off of Power Slave?
Yes, it is. Yeah. I love that you knew that right off the top of your head.
Yeah, that's awesome. And he continued that metal awesomeness in opera. He used a bit of it in opera as well. I don't think it was the same song or band.
Opera's actually one of the few I haven't seen yet. I've been saving it for the guest who decides they want to bring it on the show. Because I just know, all the Argentos, I know someone's going to pick it at some point. It's how I felt about this too. I was watching this for the first time.
Yeah, me too.
But I think the last time we spoke about Argento, actually, we were talking about, which is perfect for us, we were talking about his debut film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And we paired that with Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace when we did that episode, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe. And we did that specifically because we wanted to kind of talk about the origins of the popularization of the Giallo. It wasn't necessarily the very first film to use all of these elements, but they were the two that, Blood and Black Lace, you feel like really inspired Argento going into Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And Bird with the Crystal Plumage was the hit. It was the movie that made, we're going to do this for a decade now. I'm assuming a lot of people who listen to the show are familiar, but the Giallo was the kind of like the crime pulp paperback or the Italian crimi, but updated very much with the visual grammar of sort of Hitchcockian suspense and some Italian horror extremes that really took the stories of detectives and murder mystery and made them very icky in terms of how sexually and violently graphic that they could be, how stylishly lurid that they could be, and really started the image of the faceless black gloved killer in a trench coat, and very much going around distressingly eroticized while deciding that they are going to murder women in these very proto slasher sort of stalking point of view imagery. And I thought that was kind of an important place to start with Tenebrae, just because this film is generally understood that it came out right after Inferno, which drew him Argento, a lot of criticism about the kind of increasingly strange and hard to follow direction his narratives were going in, over, really focusing on the stylish sort of set piece exercise quality of his films. And he was also at the time experiencing, after a decade of copycats, a lot of criticism for the genre itself and for the violence against women that the genre had kind of popularized, and Tenebrae is, him kind of returning to the basics of that genre, in many ways even reusing the exact same narrative tropes and structure as The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is also about an American writer getting caught in like a serial killing murder mystery in Rome. They're almost identical in that way. Though in this case, the author is actually trying to help instead of just trying to help solve the crime using his knowledge, because I think in Bird with the Crystal Plumage, he just like really likes Christie books. So they're like, this guy can help us figure this out. In this one, he actually is the inspiration for the events that are taking place kind of in the Mouth of Madness style. There's an actual meta angle here. And most people, I think, are under the impression that Argento is very, very playfully addressing his critics and all of the filmmakers who derivatively followed in his footsteps, but maybe with not quite as formal and technical skill behind the actual filmmaking craft. And so here is Argento being like, I'm going to make a movie about a guy who makes murder mysteries, and and I guess partially also inspired by an obsessed American fan who gave him a very creepy, menacing phone call one day in LA that he felt threatened by, and being like, now I am going to make, as he described it, and I thought this interview was incredible that he gave. He described it as, I'm going to make a gory roller coaster ride. And that is well, and that's what's so funny is he got criticized for people being like, you're kind of becoming just a set piece filmmaker, and he was like, no, I'm actually going to make a gory roller coaster, but I'm going to go back to the convoluted crime plot so that you guys will take me more seriously critically. And it kind of ended up working out for him.
One interesting thing about the production history of this film too is he felt a little bit ashamed that Suspiria and Inferno hadn't been as beloved in Italy as his Giallo film, so he felt like he should do well for his Italian audience by giving them a film that they wanted.
So it's kind of for the fans and the haters alike. He was giving everyone a shout out.
That is awesome. And I mean, he even has that, writing into it, the interview that the character Peter, the author, gets with the one interviewer that's, speaking on the misogyny and the violence against women and all of that. And then he has answers for it, which is interesting. And then after the end of that interview, he's actually very playful and they seem friendly. And then, of course, we'll all get to the details, but with the ending being that he kind of transforms into the killer at a certain point. It's funny that he's kind of spinning it both ways. He's going like, yeah, well, maybe I am a killer, but also I think that some of these critiques are ridiculous and unfounded, and it's funny that he's kind of playing both. And also,
if they were founded, well, here you go. I'm going to give them to you.
Just give them to you. Yeah, exactly. It just feels like there's so many on purposely crossed wiring there, and I really like it. It's very funny to me.
That's part of the playful tension, I think, of the movie that I ended up enjoying so much. Though it's just it's kind of incredible in the way that he uses the disco soundtrack and the way I was reminded very much of the self-reflexivity that I see sometimes in what De Palma would do in the 1980s. A movie I thought about a lot while watching this was Body Double, just because there's something so similar about the garish lighting, the modernist architecture, there's one incredible like crane oneer that goes through the whole thing where I was thinking about the relax sequence, and and part of me just goes, obviously De Palma himself was taking cues from Italian horror when he was making some of his films, and it felt like this was kind of going back in that direction before Argento. And there's a lot to get into here, because there's still, for any fans of Giallo, lots of strange detail, lots of stilted dubbed dialogue, lots of convoluted plotting, but it is an incredible set piece machine. And there are some of Argento's like finest set pieces, I think, in this film. For sure.
Can I actually pull an Argento quote real quick about the gory roller coaster thing? So I have I did some research on the film prior to our conversation, and this quote really stood out to me and kind of unlocked something about Tenebrae for myself. This is directly from Dario Argento. Every killing would be like a sacred ceremony. It has to have something pure about it. I want it to feel like the Mayans, the Aztecs, and their ritualized violence. I wanted to evoke something ancient, something sacred, beautiful, and passionate.
Oh wow,
Man, he's unreal. Truly the master of horror, right there. Could only speak.
That's
those
funny.
kind
That
of
reminds
words.
me a lot of Craven making Scream when he was talking about, he was addressing the whole history of horror and that the slasher movie had become this, this kind of ancient ritual that everybody knows and worships in a way. And that's very funny that Argento was like already doing that in 1982, 1981, I guess technically. So, damn.
Yeah, and in that same interview, he rebuffed criticisms of himself and Hitchcock. He was like, "I'm not like Hitchcock at all. He's a dispassionate filmmaker. My films are full of lust and violence and hurt and anger. And his films are cold and calculated and minor of the body. It's just." He's not wrong, really. I mean, I
do get what he's
wild.
saying in a sense for sure.
Yeah.
Because he's just he doesn't he really doesn't hold anything back, and even just an obvious one would be the escalation of violence. Like it does feel like with each kill in this movie, it just keeps getting bloodier, gorier, more detailed, longer drawn out. It just
right till the end.
yeah, exactly, until the final kill, and which is probably one of the goriest ones, and the bloodiest for sure. So it's he has this escalating quality of him, and this kind of anger. It does feel like there's a rage in his filmmaking a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Which I think actually makes it kind of interesting that he's trying to pull this commentary off about like, I'm not actually sexist, when he obviously takes a lot of great. I don't know how to put it, but like the violence against women in his movies is a bit more.
It's gleeful.
It is more profound, and like I don't think that colors him as sexist necessarily, because I look at these movies through genre conventions.
Yeah,
and I think that there's a very long history of art in Italy, in particular, of combining sex and death, and how that just kind of folds into women's bodies. And I think Argento's in conversation with that, but like, Jesus Christ, some of the kills in this are gnarly, and I don't think you could get away with them in the same way today.
Yeah, and there is, I guess, just given that it's a big part of the movie itself, at a certain point, I suppose there's a second half where there's almost a different killer, which leads to slightly different kills in the way that they go about them. Like, not to say that none of them are violent, all of them are incredibly violent, but I guess with the first half, given that it's the Cristianato, I think that's his name, character that's doing them, and he has kind of that purity religious aspect. He's so
right. His kills have a philosophy, and the second half the kills don't.
Yeah, and when it does get rid of that philosophy, it does feel like Argento purposely starts making them just incredibly like passionately violent, which I guess does lead to that killer's motivation at that point in the film as well. But you can't help but look away from it and notice it. That's the thing. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think the reason Argento oftentimes got this criticism too is because, in comparison to a contemporary like someone like Fulci, he was someone who really extended and delighted in the duration of his gory sequences. Yeah. But he was someone who was kind of an equal opportunity offender in that department, I guess. Like, it was like a guy, you might watch a woman get her eye poked open, and it's going to take 5 horrible minutes for you to watch it happen, and she's going to scream, and there's something horrible about that. You're also going to watch the same thing of like a guy break his spine falling off a ladder in a library, and spiders rip his face apart for also 5 minutes. And I think some of the difference that Argento picked up on was that when he extends a sequence, it's because he wants to watch a half-naked woman run around a room getting just absolutely, annihilated far beyond what is tasteful. And he deliberately did that. He talked about deliberately doing that. He loved the beautiful artistic staging of how to extend a scene like that and how to make a woman just get absolutely tormented. And I think he liked the idea of like the creepy echoing scream. He ends this film in that way. Right.
And there's one sequence in, but compare a sequence in this, like the woman getting chased by a dog around for like 10 minutes, it's very different than like the guy who just gets an axe to the head very quickly. And I think that that's part of where the criticisms against Argento were happening. And what I kind of liked about Tenebrae was that it did kind of feel that he was being like the I guess part of the body double comparison as well, is that it's kind of like, well, here you go. You're getting exactly what you want. You're getting exactly what you say I do. And also I'm going to kind of enjoy doing it while I do it. And I think the movie then having such a meta source of the character of the murder mystery author who in some way ends up kind of either transferring or inspiring and even maybe being the source of some of this menacing quality that's laced throughout the entire film. There is a kind of troubling implication in there that these obsessively constructed images of women dying must come from a really poisoned and perverted place. And he's kind of, I think, partially acknowledging that, yeah, maybe so, and maybe that's me. Fuck you. I don't know.
Yeah, and I do think he complicates this a little bit because in his films the men are often buffoons and the women are the heroes. Mm-hmm. So he kind of has his cake and eats it too, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. And then I guess to your other point about him presenting a film full of things that people criticize him of, I think horror directors just kind of have a rebellious personality and do this sometimes. Even someone as straight-laced as David Cronenberg made a movie filled with all of the things that people accused him of 1 year later with Videodrome. Yes. Like with Videodrome, he was like, okay, so you actually believe that the content of my movies can drive someone insane? Like, I will actually make a movie about that then. I will make a conservative movie about images corrupting people, and he'll do that, and I think that's consistent within the genre. Like we're getting a little bit off the plot of the film, but like, yes,
we'll circle back for anyone who hasn't seen it. Don't worry.
But it's an important point for sure. I mean, we've like even things like, you know, that kind of have both sides to it, like The Exorcist, for instance. You're still dealing with this kind of you know, the Catholic guilt. That it is still the priest being some type of like connection to a higher being, getting rid of the devil. It has those contradictions, but it's just that it's it always just I think horror has inherent contradictions a lot of the time, because what can scare us might not necessarily also be like what we really believe in, politically speaking, spiritually, whatever it is.
Which is also something that we get into in the book. We take a look at these images of like transphobia and then like reconsider them to see if they have nuance or whatever. And Caden can get into that a little bit.
Oh yeah, like obviously, like just the title of our book gives the illusions of a certain genre bent, even though that, fully enough, that actually did come from a Boys Don't Cry body talk, where Willow evoked that term. But just in general, like, we sort of deal with the fact that we as trans people are treated as the monstrosity, and sort of dealing with the fact that we genre sort of use our bodies or something that could perhaps be put into the experience as being the other, use that as the monster. But we also look at the more empathetic and humanistic sort of side to that, and also in many ways where you sort of go back to this Susan Stryker vein of our text, of sort of almost embracing being seen as the monstrosity and the other, and sort of going through that, because I would say more than one movie that we talk about that's in the horror genre that has a trans villain has been reclaimed in some way. Would you agree, Willow? Like, I've even seen people who like have a sleepaway camp t-shirts that say fuck turfs on it or something like that. Even though I would say we're both pretty down on that movie. Yeah, but you know, we try to go into nuance and also go into sort of history of the real life social experiences of transness as horror or something horrifying. Yet I think both of us our experiences with gender dysphoria and feeling out of our body, we do kind of find something that the horror genre can tap into, of characters who are sympathetic or feeling out of their body, or feel like the monstrosity done to them either by some sort of circumstance or by mankind itself can kind of feel more liberating than more of the social realist representations we're often told we have to support, when I think there's something a little more flexible in getting into the horror genre.
Mm-hmm. And which I think pulls us into this film, because I think that with the image of Eva Robins, we're looking at the body of an actual trans person. And if you compare it to how Sleepaway Camp uses the body of a hypothetical trans person, they couldn't be any more different from one another. So like, let's get into the Eva Robins of it all in this film.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, the Eva Robins element comes through once we're kind of introduced to our sort of basic concept here, which, speaking of liberation as well, is we have a black-gloved killer on the loose, flipping through the pages of Peter Neal's newest book, Tenebrae, which he is taking direct inspiration of in front of a fireplace before burning it. And part of, I guess, the idea that the killer is taking from it is the idea that the impulse and the fury that is within the killer that is torturing him, it is, a deep-rooted taboo that he needs to not feel guilt or anxiety or fear about, but instead a sense of freedom. And that every humiliation he's ever felt in his life could be swept away by the simple act of annihilation and murder. And I guess the reason I wanted to bring that aspect of it up is because I think that Eva Robins' inclusion in this film is incredibly important, because she is, in the sequences that she's used in the film, the source of that feeling of emasculation and humiliation that is so central to both what this Peter Neal character wrote in his book that is inspiring the killer, and that becomes so central to the transformation that takes place in this book that leads to this sense of liberation. It is a fear of a trans woman, and the power that they might have over him is essentially what inspires the entire sequence of events. And it starts in a more kind of, I guess, familiar realm of, like, we're following Neal biking to JFK in his tracksuit, and it turns into this, a very Hitchcockian kind of voyeur stalker thriller sequence, but from the perspective of, Neal's ex-fiancée Jane, who is following him around and is going to become something of a red herring for the film, and then also another woman, a shoplifter named Elsa, who eagle-eyed Italian horror lovers might recognize as the babysitter from Fulci's house by the cemetery. And she is the first victim of the film, getting sort of stalked around the airport shops by a heavy breathing killer while she's trying to steal Neal's trashy horror paperback, like from the stands. And the killer follows her back to her apartment. She's also, in classic Argento fashion, he loves to throw you like a curveball or like a weird sense. He has her assaulted by a homeless man as another form of a red herring. And has great shots of, I mean, in terms of like sort of technical construction, it's very impressive. The shots of the sort of the neighbors and the windows all witnessing her and sort of are undressing and her telephone not working. He's following a lot of the basic tropes of how a scene like this works, and then has the killer slash her with a straight razor in the throat while also stuffing pages of the book into her mouth and taking photos of the aftermath. And it's a very grisly sequence meant to get you into, like, this is what this killer is up to. But the interspersed through sequences like this is the Eva Robins sort of like flashback at a beach, which we don't know who the subject of this memory is, but you can kind of tell by the kind of hazy way that it is photographed and the way that it is kind of scored in this very moody way, that we are watching something very, very important and something that's already happened. It feels dreamlike. And it is Eva Robins at first being approached by all of these different men around a beach, and she's in a white dress and she's got the red heels. She very much stands out in the crowd of people. She gets hit in the sequence, and then at a certain point, the person who hit her, who is having this dream or this memory, sees her kind of command all of the other fellow guys to grab that person and just absolutely humiliates him on the beach, to the point where you get this very, very striking image in the film of her red heel just being kind of stomped into his face, which, after we talked about the power of Eva Robin's sort of physical performance in Eva Man, this is a very, very sort of powerful moment in the film that kind of incorporates seduction and assault and mud and humiliation and this almost like fairy tale twinkling music to it. It's a very sort of traumatic moment that you're meant to go, is this why a guy would hate a woman and murder a woman? And the answer Argento provides is, I guess, yes.
Yeah, it's like the and the editing and the shots themselves are fantastic too. Like, there's that one shot of her approaching, and I think she looks right into the camera and then spits the blood at the lens, and it's supposed to signify, the blood getting spat onto the man. And just even that shot of her not just pressing into him with the heel, but the whole heel going inside his mouth, and he's like choking on it before it cuts back into the reality. It's so good. It's really, really good, and it is one of the, strangely enough, I mean, it's obviously not as bloody or anything, but just the way that he directs it, it feels not but close to the violence that you see throughout the
blood
film.
Red heel helps in that.
Yeah, definitely. He uses the color to his advantage. It's but just those quick cuts and those powerful moments with Eva are amazing.
Yeah, there's definitely a psychosexual element to this particular scene. I think that Argento is kind of interesting about queerness, actually. It pops up in a lot of his films in various ways. There's the character who has gender trauma in Four Flies on Grey Velvet. There's that scene in the Bird with the Crystal Plumage of them having the police line up and then him saying like, the police officer saying like, I asked for the perverts, not the transsexuals. And there's the scene in Deep Red where like, should I spoil that movie? Like,
go for it.
Yeah,
people listening to the show at this point should have seen Deep Red.
They've probably seen Deep Red, but like, the Deep Red concludes with like this gay couple like being the murder mystery of that one is revealed around this gay couple, and there's a woman playing a man and cross-dressing. It's just, there's all these little things in his picture, so it's not like totally strange for a queer person like Eva Robin to show up in his work, but the way that he films her is kind of different. Because while watching this scene, don't you get the sense that Eva Robins is like pulling the camera? Like she's just, there's something instinctual about it. Like she's just kind of, she has a come hither quality, and it's like it's like she has the
her for sure.
It definitely, it's like she has the camera on a leash on a collar, and it's just following her. So there's this definite like POV feeling of being like, yes, this character is definitely attracted to Eva Robins. So, and I think that the film doesn't quite tell us if she's canonically trans in this film. But I think it's more interesting if you do read the character as trans, because it opens up all of these fascinating elements of his panic about his heterosexuality and the instance of him like where do his impulses come from, and why is he violent in particular, and why is it revolving around this trans woman that he is very obviously attracted to.
Even though I think this has been confirmed, but it might just be magical thinking. But when I was watching it, I immediately thought of Women on the Beach, easy, very almost dreamlike, nightmarish flashbacks. This definitely feels like it's from the Joe Mankiewicz film Suddenly Last Summer, and it seemed that it was an homage, which is a very interesting way to also look at the sort of queerness of a picture, and particularly of that situation. Although I would say Argento, with how Eva Robinson's character is used, sort of subverts that, because if you haven't seen Suddenly Last Summer, well, first of all, it's a fun, very sort of psychosexual film. about Elizabeth Taylor sort of having this repressed trauma over experiencing the murder of her cousin Sebastian, who was this gay man who basically gets punished in the text for basically lusting over people on the beach, and he basically gets chased to his death and basically devoured, literally devoured. And to quote Gore Vidal, who was responsible for the adaptation of the screenplay, Tennessee could be a little much, and in terms of the sort of implications, but you kind of see how in this scene the sort of power dynamics are flipped in this situation. Instead of this crowd of almost faceless men at the beck and call of Eva Robins, or surrounding her in a way that could be potentially malicious, there is this one sort of guy who stands out from the crowd who basically mistreats her, and then she basically throws it back at him and then doubles down and overpowers him. And that is, as Willow said, a very powerful scene. But I think when Willow was doing research of this, she actually found something that added a sort of power and poignancy to that. Willow, do you still have that information?
Yeah, Eva Robins's scene was shot in Ostia at a beach that the gay and lesbian community called The Hole. It was a transgressive nudist beach. And Eva Robins felt the scene had a wonderful contrast because it was a violent scene, but she believes that the nudity in her body and in the nature in the scene is complementary to harmony. She believes that these contrasting elements were communicating with one another and created this really beautiful vista. But also in the scene, she felt that she exercised some of her own demons because she had a great fear as a trans woman, as a group of young boys doing harm to her if her trans status had been found out. She used her own experiences around young men because she was attracted to men to inform the reality of the scene. So a lot of what she's feeling and communicating in that scene was cathartic for her as a trans woman, which I think adds a extra little layer into the film.
Yeah. Well, and speaking to your point too about like whether the character is trans and whether this is something, I mean, I would have to imagine that Dario Argento on some level knew what he was doing with the casting and also the queer elements that you were saying kind of get brought up in his movies. But I think it's also very specific to the one that he's generated here, because this is an inciting trauma for a character who eventually will become a killer by the end of the film, and who has obviously become obsessed with writing about killers and is currently inspiring a killer. But the killer that he is inspiring is someone who, I guess, spoiler alert, we always talk spoilers, so everybody knows, but we are kind of jumping around with this one a little bit. But in the early goings, it is this American author on the promotional tour in Italy, being organized by his secretarial assistant Anne and his publishing agent Bulmer, the former played by Argento's then girlfriend and co-screenwriter Dario Nicolodi, who was involved behind the camera from his entire run, including Deep Red and Suspiria all the way through Opera. And the latter is the early slasher movie legend John Saxon from Black Christmas and Nightmare on Elm Street, and but essentially one of the earliest scenes is them setting up for him he's going to talk to some of the critics, and he's going to promote his book. And Jamie already mentioned the woman who brings up that Tenebrae is it's a sexist novel. Why do you despise women so much? Women are victims or ciphers for male heroes and their hairy macho bullshit. But the other aspect of this is there's a TV producer or critic that he talks to, who ends up being the central killer of the film, who is inspired by the text, and he is deliberately in the text made to be a conservative religious writer, who later basically says that he identifies with the book because you isolate human perversion or deviant behavior, which he heavily implies to mean queer behavior and its effect on society, and he agrees with the intense and the bigoted beliefs of the killer of the book. And you see the author immediately trying to separate. He's like, no, the only aberrant behavior in my book is the killer. It's not any sort of gay victim who that killer hates. Like, you're taking the wrong lesson from this. It's very funny that even after that scene, he somehow didn't realize that guy was the killer. I was kind of immediately, I was like, yeah, I think that creepy dude might have something to do with this. But it's also important that he's being channeled that idea, or he's reading that idea into the book. And then you have this scene where a trans woman is the source of this traumatic memory that has resulted in the inspiration for that author that made its way into the book. And so there is a kind of larger conversation here on, this guy obviously being incredibly terrified of women, but also being terrified of queerness as well. And that making its way into the material, seeping into the killer's actions then, which gives Argento a very good excuse to depict his killer just going around, for example, one of the sequences, speaking of all of this, is him murdering two queer women. That's one of the central sequences of the movie. But also, Argento's like, look, I'm pointedly saying this, I'm pointedly doing this, but also couldn't we have a fun disco track generated by the former members of Goblin while I am doing all of this while my camera is going to replicate the free floating freedom of this misogynistic, sort of gay panic murderer who is going to just be like, I'm going to kill these queer women who are finding pleasure outside of men, essentially. And it is one hell of a technically accomplished sequence. But again, all of those layers of the queerness and misogyny are, they're all in there in the text.
Mm-hmm. And that's why Argento's so complex, because he will be he'll give you that progressive idea that you just elaborated on, but he'll do it like in this really pleasurable crane shot that he did with his DP Tivolo. Through this Luma crane shot. It lasts like 4 minutes long. It's
I just saw The Passenger on a print recently, and it was what I was thinking about, that the penultimate shot of The Passenger where Jack Nicholson's character
it's actually a direct homage. It's the same DP.
Yeah.
It's
amazing.
And it's interesting, like this particular film actually made Tarkovsky want to work with this DP. He was like, oh, I love Tenebrae, I want to work with you, which is an interesting kind of conversation to imagine happening. And it almost happened. He almost shot Nostalgia, but Antonioni was like, no, you're going to shoot my new film, which never happened. It was like directors like dick measuring to try to fight over this DP who was a genius. It's beautiful. But I don't think it's a mistake that a lot of the people who die in this movie are queer characters, and a lot of this violence is stemming from this kind of central rot happening around how these men can consider these quote unquote deviants that they perceive as threats to the natural order or whatever. It's an interesting sort of shoe on the other foot for horror films, because usually trans people are presented as threats to the natural order, or even lesbian characters are often presented that way too. Like if you go back in the 70s, there's a lot of like evil lesbian movies that show up in like jail films about like women in prison pictures. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting sort of twist on these ideas of like flipping the moral compass in the other direction.
Sure. There is something so funny to me about Argento being like, look, I've heard all your critiques, but what if I also killed lesbians and bisexual women? And like, when how would you feel? Like, then would it be, and it's kind of like on one level, no, on another level, I see what you're trying to do. And, but it is just so funny to me that he, again, he's layering in like this very progressive, it's not even subtext. It is, there is some qualities where it is, it's right there, but then he'll be like, now we need a 2.5 minute long oneer of showing that these women are completely unsafe, even in a giant brutalist fortress that's like beautiful, and the way that the camera is just like voyeuristically dancing around it and being like, we are going to, these women are going to be absolutely annihilated in this very geographically insane sequence where I couldn't even actually follow what exactly happens to the first woman, because she's like slashed through what looks like a hole in her shirt, and then the other woman is, you know, half naked and running around the place. And that it all kind of builds up to that moment where the razor slash hits the light bulb out, and the chase goes through the stairs and the broken mirror shards, and once again the killer is snapping and flashing and taking all these photographs of this murder as well, because once again Argento is indulging himself in a little bit of auto critique on my killer is also going to be, you know, taking pleasure in the staging and shooting of all of this. It's interesting in that way.
There is cool that there's like just using the crane shot, because we've had so many established shots where the killer has a POV in which, you know, it's kind of looking through certain things. Like the first example would be when he's stalking the woman that's stealing from the store, and he's just looking at things through, like, you know, air fresheners on the aisles, and that's where the camera's placed. With the crane shot, it just becomes so much larger than life, and it's almost this unnatural voyeurism. Like, instead of just seeing the someone undressed from the first floor, it starts on the first floor, but then goes all the way across the roof, down the side of the building to the second story of the building. Like, it's just. It feels like
it's too graceful. You're like this guy should be you know, sweating and panting trying to find an open window. It doesn't. Yeah, the camera is becoming disembodied in the way that it does. Yeah, it's like implying that it's becoming too easy for him to do this almost, or something like that. Or is it self-implicating? Is it also Argento being like, my camera is also going to be the killer and can do whatever it wants, though? Yeah. Good luck, ladies. What's interesting too is the way that he uses POV in a bunch of different contexts. Like, he, in the dream sequence we were talking about with Eva, she looks directly into the camera, and there is kind of like a presence to that. Like, Willow, you were saying that she's kind of like drawing you in a little bit. And then with other moments where people are looking directly at the camera, it's actually because they're being chased by the killer, and you're getting the POV of that chase. And so there's just these contrasts that go back and forth between like someone powerful looking into the camera and leading you into it, or even her spitting at the lens, for instance, in that sequence, to the one younger, the teenager that's being chased through the yard and then eventually stabbed. What an insane sequence, by the way. That sequence goes on way longer than it logistically should have. He was just like, a dog chases her, the most athletic dog you've ever seen chases her over fences through like modernist yards. And eventually, all to get her to an insane moment where she arrives at the killer's lair, and he accidentally left the keys in the lair. So she just walks in. I was like, dude, what is the writing on this sequence? It was like, he's pushing things along. It's fine. It does feel like it should be two separate kills just put together. Like, the girl really goes through a lot of torture before the final kill happens there. And it's so long that my brain was starting to go, well, maybe she's going to survive. Maybe he actually isn't setting me up for a kill. Because I was terrified for her the second our lead protagonist, author Peter, called her jailbait. I was like, stop, man, don't do it. That long sequence that you just mentioned, where like the dog is chasing her, is actually the cinematographer's like favorite scene in the film. He thinks that is actually his crowning achievement, not the crane shot, because he thinks that the entire sequence was lit for total brightness and contrast. He thinks that there's no place for her or the audience to hide. He said in that sequence, he said it's totally unrealistic because there's no shadows anywhere. There's nowhere for this character to hide. And he said that's the best thing he's ever done in his entire career, was that sequence with the dog chasing her. That's awesome. So sick. It's so sick to be the guy who shot the iconic penultimate shot of The Passenger. That is like just one of the most famous shots in Italian art house movie history, and be like, the scene where a teenager gets chased by a dog over a fence for 5 minutes straight is the greatest achievement of my career. I love him. This is amazing. What's incredible about the sequence too, there is like, and I don't know if it's on purpose, but there is some like
comedy involved with the amount of times that dog, like the girl thinks that she's escaped because she's climbed the third fence in the sequence, and the dog's like, nope, and then just climbs up another one. Literally, there's 3 separate shots, I think, where the dog, you see it thinking, it backs up and then runs to the fence and climbs over it. And it like at a certain point, it became very funny to me.
That's another. It's another motif in his work. I mean, Dario Argento is weird about dogs. Like even in his new film, Dark Glasses or Black Glasses or whatever it was called.
It's true.
There's this long sequence of a woman being chased by a dog and she gets her throat ripped out or something. Yep. It's like this guy has like dog trauma more than anything else. I think I think that's Argento's prime neurosis is dogs. He's super weird about dogs.
He never got that accusation in his career. They're like, dude, you just hate dogs.
You hate dogs, dude. Yeah. What was funny is that when that sequence happened, when she was just walking down the street and the dog just ran up the fence and started chasing her, I did get a legitimately kind of scared flashback of when I was 10 years old and that same thing happened to me. It was a much smaller dog, so it probably wasn't nearly as scary, but it was funny that I had, I think, the same situation that Argento went through. So I had that initial fear.
Yeah, I know, like, most people regarding movies have a sort of preemptive anxiety whenever a dog enters the fray in a movie, and they immediately have, like, their smartphone at the ready for doesthedogdie.com or something.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That comes up so much on our podcast because I use it all. My girlfriend is very, not even animal deaths bothers her, but it's actually vomit is something she can't stand. And so we use that all the time as like to check, does this movie have like a really graphic vomit or realistic vomit scene in it? But it's an incredible resource if you have anything that like you can't, you just prefer not to see in your movies, or you'd like to know where it is and be warned about it up front. It's a great website for that, but sorry to digress. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So Willow is obviously more well versed in Argento than I am, and that's why I'm like not speaking as much on this, even though I freaking love this movie so much. But I'm fascinated by the fact that this man, the possible route to this man sort of being the horror god that he is, might come from dog trauma. And you can tell because he respects the dogs. They are not victims in his gory, gnarly, gnarly episodes.
The dogs don't die.
They're doing the killing.
The dogs are death incarnate.
They're the agents of death, and honestly, like probably the worst sort of realization to have if you're a victim. Fighting man to man feels equal, but you're going up against a dog, and then you kind of feel bad if you have to like take on a dog. I kind of find genius in that. This is like. This is his version of To Kill a Child, Who Could Kill a Child or something. I don't know.
What a great movie, too.
It also leads to an awesome shot before the dog does initially tackle her and start kind of chomping a little bit before she makes her second escape, where it's just this big wide shot and there's these kind of these cool trees and she runs in between them and you just see she gets like all the way to the end of the shot and then you see the dog just quickly catch up and just running and tackle her, and there is like a very intense fear and feeling of that, just something running that fast at you. Again, this is connected to like a 10-minute sequence in which she eventually meets the killer.
That's what I was gonna say. That's what I find so amusing about this eventual set piece is like this is enough of a set piece that you would be like, oh, that's it. The set piece is done. And it's like, no, the dog, it feels like cosmically leads her to the killer in a way. And then it's like she's walking around the yard of like what looks like a Miami Vice villa or something like that. And she ends up, cutting back to the sort of keys in the door while the killer is doing his own sequence where he's like, stalking some sex workers at night and around Rome. And, especially I want to highlight around a very modernist vision of
Yeah,
Rome. Like I think
Yeah.
I did read that he was like specifically like, I'm showing the urban side of this. I'm not using the same locations that everyone does where they make Rome out to look like this, you know, this historical museum piece, he referred to it as. And he was like, I'm going to make this more, you know, a little bit more futuristic kind of looking. And that's where the dog leads her into this lair. And it gets,
You want to know you want to know
go
another
ahead.
thing that he said? He was actually heavily inspired by the look of Possession for this film. He loved the hyper realist look of that picture. So he went to his DP and was like, we're going to shoot this as hyper realist, high contrast, garish, almost black and white. I want my film to feel like jagged ice. Like,
damn, that explains the lighting choices.
Yeah,
because it's very different than like the use of lighting in his like supernatural horror films, which
definitely
get very, very neon and very colorful and very shadowy. That is like not at all what this movie. It looks like it's literal opposite in terms of that.
It's funny you said shadows. He wanted this film he wanted the title of the film to be ironic. Like he didn't want there to be shadows in this movie. He wanted
no darkness.
He wanted there to be no darkness. Yeah. He wanted the film to feel too bright, like just unusually bright, like
it is
completely
kind of
unrealistic
looking in that way, like beautiful, but kind of like it feels unnatural in that way, like watching her eventually get to the killer's place and look around his lair where she's seeing the photographs and she eventually goes up into the, you know, the actual main floor and once again tries to use a phone that doesn't work. He loves that bit where they try to use a phone. I was like, why are you calling the police from the killer's phone? I was trying to figure that one out a little bit, but it doesn't matter. She gets absolutely chased through a sliding glass door and then axed in the abdomen, like on the lawn, and then found by a guy who's like mowing the lawn the next day in like a creepy POV shot where I was like, he's gonna run her over.
It reminded me of that
very
shot in Sinister, actually, a little bit. I mean, it's a little bit more of like a pop-up in Sinister, but it's the same shot. It's the POV of the lawnmower, and then you see the body.
Right.
So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that axe eventually becomes central to this whole thing because as we've been kind of discussing, Peter Neal has been helping out all these various characters trying to solve what is it this killer is up to. They found the killer's home essentially, and we still are, you know, no closer to figuring out who this is, other than I immediately went, you know, I'm not a genius at figuring this shit out, but I went, yeah, maybe the guy who hates gay people, who said he loves that the book hates gay people, is the guy killing the lesbian women. I was just kind of thinking about that for a little bit, but Neil is contributing to this by trying to help them solve the murder mystery. He's doing this alongside a male and female detective, one of which is played by Giuliano Gemma, who is, for anyone familiar with the spaghetti western genre, Mr. Ringo from Ringo and the Return, A Pistol for Ringo and the Return of Ringo, which has one of my favorite Morricone character themes ever. Also Day of Anger with Lee Van Cleef. And he has such a tiny role as like a bit part, as a guy who's almost being a joke of a detective character. Like he's like, they're like, he's drinking his scotch and asking for the novelist's like cooperation. I only drink when I'm on duty. And then he goes on about his love of crime books at one point. He's like, I love Mickey Spillane and like Ed McBain, and I'm going to find this killer. And
I love his partner too, because he's like, I wish I had a male detective working.
Yes, I was just going to mention that.
He wouldn't have let the killer get away, and then she gives it right back to him and says, you would hate it. You'd have nothing to bitch about.
It's such a good line. See, this is the contrast of Argento. He'll give you a moment like that where he's very, very self-aware of the kind of characters that he's writing. He's writing you like a kind of a chauvinist detective character who is belittling his female partner, Dirty Harry style. Actually, Dirty Harry wouldn't even allow himself to have a female partner. There's a whole movie about that.
Wait. Oh yeah, there. When Cadmium,
forget which one that is. It's in one of the sequels. He spends the whole thing being like, affirmative action isn't real. You can't make me have a female partner. In this one, it's like, she gets to kind of hit him back a little bit and gets to kind of help solve the mystery a little bit. Although she kind of gets punished for wanting to be involved in that, unfortunately, because it is eventually revealed as the movie goes on that not only do we have one killer, There's nothing a Giallo loves more than having two killers. The only thing this needed was also one of the killers, a third killer, but it's a woman. That would have been the ultimate Giallo. We're hitting all the beats in one.
Which, interestingly enough, with the whole Saxon subplot and the cheating, you almost think that it's leading to that. Like they're coming up with some master plan to get rid of the author for money or whatever the heck.
Yeah, where like the ex-fiance is involved or something like that because she gets the red heels in the mail, and you're like, oh, is she going to restage this traumatic moment for whoever's memory it is, which is she is, but just not as a willing participant.
Yeah, and
can I say something about her for a second?
Yeah.
Do y'all know the actor that plays the woman who gets her arm severed and goes full Jackson Pollock, dripping blood all over the wall? Do you know that she married like the prime minister of Italy, and they had to censor that scene for like a very long time because they couldn't have a political figure be murdered on film?
I didn't know it was that reason. I just thought they censored it because it was so over the top. But that's wild. I had no idea.
Yeah, I'm looking up her page now. Yeah, so it's Veronica Lario. She was she's married to Silvio Berlusconi. Look at that.
Who Dario Nicolodi called the horrible names in the special features of this film. So I assume he's some sort of asshole. I don't know Italian politics front and back.
Oh,
but
Berlusconi. He's basically Trump Italian style, essentially.
Okay, well, I trust Daria on this. She knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, Team Daria by instinct, but in knowing who that woman married, yes, absolutely.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, I had no idea that was a reason for the censor. I knew that they had a censored version that they released that everybody hated. I think it was like unanimously panned when it came out. And I can't remember.
Well, that was part of
Argento's
magic plan to be like, I'm going to, I've been doing so well kind of overseas, but not doing well in Italy. I'm going to give the Italians what they finally want. But then it got super, super released in a truncated version in the US and got just absolutely panned.
Oh, yeah. And it was a video.
It wasn't the movie that he released essentially, but it was very funny. He's like, I'm going to make one for my Italians. And then he was forced to because they cut it down in America.
Right. And then I think it was banned from sale till 1999 because of the video nasty list that they had in Britain.
It was in the video nasty list, although kind of low key for the video nasty list, I'll be honest.
Yeah, because we've covered a couple of them, and this one, I mean, it gets there in moments, but some of the video nasties that we've covered have
pure
been
body
insane.
count numbers, I guess you could argue, but it cuts away a little bit more tastefully than some of the other films that made that list, for sure.
For sure, yeah.
But the whole sort of like final third of this movie is Peter Neal eventually revealed to be half investigating himself, although the exact logistics of this I did find very funny, which is that the entire time it was the TV critic character who was obsessed with his book to an unhealthy degree, who was committing every single murder until that guy gets killed, when it's revealed that Peter Neal is the one who decided to kill him and then use, for some reason, after killing him, to be like, I'm going to imagine he's still out there killing people and on the hunt, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to kill my ex-fiance and my book agent, John Saxon, and then frame him, even though I've already killed him. I'm actually struggling to relay this coherently, even. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it is very funny that he just immediately goes, so he hasn't been the killer the whole time, but he decides to be the killer for just like the final 3 kills.
Yeah, and they do imply it through.
Here's a question. Which film is more narratively confusing, Tenebrae or Eva Man? Like honestly.
Yeah,
it's kind of equal. It's because at least Eva Man is so bare bones that I feel like I got it. There was something in my gut, and in this one I was like, I know enough Argento to understand what he's going for, and there's enough in the sort of in the text and the ideas and the way that he's formally accomplishing them that I understand what he's going for. But I do feel at a certain point he was looking at the way that the Giallo genre, the direction it was going in terms of what they did with the crime mysteries, and he was like, I actually don't care logistically about how I get to these sequences I want to get to and these points I want to get to, which is why here's a 5-minute scene of a woman getting chased by a dog so that she arrives at the killer's lair and she looks at it and finds it, but it just because the killer left the keys in the door and then kills her. And I was like, this is just the actual scripting of getting through the motions he wants to get through is very, very ridiculous. But on some level,
Eva
in the
Robin's-
same Eva Man way, in my gut, I kind of understood that, you know what, all of this was deep inside Peter Neal the entire time. He wanted to be a killer. And now he's finally just kind of found the moment, the opportunity where here's a guy who's doing it all. And what if I just kind of slid into his place and killed the people I wanted to kill, like John Saxon? But you can't get away with killing John Saxon. We all know that.
Eva Robins may have accidentally made the movie more confusing because they had this script in mind. They were going to have Daria play the character that Eva ends up playing. It was only going to be one scene, but then they met Eva and they were like, okay, she needs to be in like 3 or 4 scenes. We need to give her like an important character, traumatic flashback thing. They completely
because there's a second flashback where he stabs her too, right?
Yes,
and he's the
yes.
first. She's technically the first kill, and then that has been seeping its way into his books this whole time, and it's almost like it's been repressed and it's reawakened by someone taking inspiration by this thing that he was sort of subconsciously expressing in his book.
Which is,
it actually makes more sense now that I describe it that way.
When Lamberto Bava met her, he was so charmed that he thought like, okay, we have to have her in so many more scenes. So they basically rewrote the script for her. So that may have accidentally, like, when I said that she was a star, like Lamberto Bava felt it, Argento felt it. They thought she has to have more of a presence in this film. Unfortunately, she's not really in many Italian Giallo murder kind of films after this. But like, she makes a mark here.
She tried to go into some more high-profile films and actually landed some high-profile films that we probably should talk about, because one of the more significant ones was kind of an interesting flashpoint of seeing sort of trans movies that popped up at the Cannes Film Festival in many ways. It's a little, this film does get complicated and naughty. I would just say, out of instinct and gut, maybe the lesson here is that, Willow, I don't think we should tour our book in Italy. It just feels like, with the uptick in parasocial relationships that I feel like both of us have each separately and as a pair have accrued over the last couple of years, it might not be safe. I'm just putting it out there. I know you want to go to. I know you want to go to Italy. I know you want to see how the sausage gets made in Giallo. But we might be flying too close to the sun. Have I just mixed 5 different metaphors and illusions? Yes, but I feel like these are the lessons imparted by Dario.
The Italians are going to say Eva Robins is not in the book. You're both banned from the country, video nasty style.
So what you're saying, Caden, is we should not go to Italy and have our own real life Tenebrae experience. Because I'm the trans woman, I would be the one getting killed. Like, I would be in real trouble here.
I'll buy you if you do. Since you can't come to the United States, but if you can go to Italy, I'll send you some red stilettos. But girl,
I was gonna say maybe Dario Argento would let you step on him first, though.
I would
think about it that way.
I would gladly be in a Dario Argento movie if he wanted me to be. Like, I just that
how good at you are at for outrunning dogs is the question. In heels.
That will be the audition. The only thing you have to do in the audition.
I will.
His daughter's not even safe from a sequence like that.
I will go to the gym tomorrow.
Start that cardio.
Yeah. Yeah. But the last thing we should hit before we wrap up is absolutely what Willow already alluded to. The insane final sequence of this movie, where all of this stuff coheres into one place. The detective, the ex-fiance, John Saxon's character, who gets a really extended a very strange murder sequence where he like watches a woman get sort of like assaulted in the distance whilst in a public like park or in a public place, and then just gets stabbed with a shard of mirror in public while like nobody is watching, and then everyone kind of goes, oh, he just got like stabbed to death. And at this point we're kind of starting to put together that it's Peter Neal, but it's around the time that he actually goes to his, you know, where his ex-fiancée Jane is staying. He's mailed her the red shoes like Eva Robin's wears, and he strangles one of John Saxon's assistants in the backseat of the car, who is the one who is there for the murder of the first killer, and who's the one who hears him actually say that I am the killer and I did all of this. And there's a line too where he's just like slimy perverts or something. The killer has so many weird lines that he gets, but the guy,
weird voice.
You know,
I love the voice.
Very much. You know, we're starting to gather that a second killer, that he was the first killer, and there's a second killer currently operating now. And Peter Neal goes to Jane, who is scared in her apartment, in her dress, in her heels, and an axe just bursts through the window, chopping off this really elaborate prosthetic arm that she then spins around and shoots bright red bloodbath out of her stump all over the white wall. The squib work and the way that he just keeps hacking into her over and over again, and then eventually revealing that it is Peter Neal, and he is absolutely on a killing spree, and he ends up killing the female detective as well when she runs in, although briefly also thinks that it's Daria's character, and then he immediately is like, he regrets throwing an axe into her, and then he realizes it's not her. He's like, I actually don't regret that as much anymore. And it's a very just like everything colliding all at once kind of sequence, and you can tell that Argento, in terms of how he decided to shoot it, was like, this is my kind of crazy abstract art bloodbath moment, which he even has like art hanging around in the back of the house, and he eventually has that art fall on the killer and like fucking impale him to death. And like, I was like, Jesus, man. Like, Argento really goes all out in this final sequence.
And even like the fake out, like he even it goes to the extent that you could have the simple finale that you had, and I still would have really enjoyed this movie, but just to add an extra 5 minutes, a couple other little surprises. He has Peter Neal fake slit his throat. And right,
how did I almost forgot that part?
Yeah, and so it's so elaborate. Cop, and I believe is it Anne?
It's Anne, the Daria character.
They leave thinking like, okay, this is over. I'm going to go grab the body. I'll make the report.
He killed himself out of guilt of becoming a killer and becoming like one of the characters in his book. And then he rises up behind the detective character in that amazing shot of him dropping down and the rack focus to, oh my God, it's so good.
Yeah, it's perfect. Right. It kind of reminded me of that simple camera trickery that we had. Was it Shock, where the guy, it's like the little kid runs down the hallway until he's not in camera anymore, and then the man pops up as if he's like transformed, but it's all in one shot. It's a very simple trick, but it's incredibly effective. Just the framing of it is awesome. So yeah, I thought that little fake out was great, and and then the impaling, which we already talked about, which he really elongates more than he has to as well. Like you actually have on that Peter one Neal,
where it's like he's trying to pull it out of himself, and fucking Daria is just screaming at the top of her lungs, and her screaming becomes the disco music for that scene, and then it cuts to black, and you're like, that's the last thing you're left with, and
it's incredible.
It's unsettling. Honestly.
Yeah, just screams and storm. That's it. Those are the sounds you get.
I just the sound of Peter Neal just like gripping the art piece that he's impaled with, and he can't get it out, and it's just slippery and just it's awful. It is an awful sound. And he languishes in it, and then Daria just starts screaming her lungs out. A real Laura Palmer Hall of Fame scream, we should say.
Definitely.
I was amazing. I was waiting for you to say that. Because when I rewatched it last night, I'm like, this is giving Laura Palmer. Oh my god.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh yeah,
just it's incredible. It's incredible.
And even,
it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's incredible.
Yeah, and even Argento focusing on Peter Neal's like dead eyes for a moment before he cuts away to the scream and everything. It's just these details they really add up, and he's a master. He's unbelievable.
Yeah, and definitely at like the height of just his like skills as a formalist and being like, I want to show off that I can do that, and anyone else who's trying to do the genre isn't doing it right. And also, I'm giving all of the fans and all of the haters exactly what they're looking for at the same time, and I'm making my gory set piece machines that I want to make, but I'm giving you the weirdly convoluted and strangely detailed plot that you kind of expect out of these movies. I'm also getting in both of these, progressive ideas that I'm being criticized for not putting in my movies, but also using them as an excuse to indulge in all of the perversities I want to anyway. It's like Argento's going all out. It feels like a culmination of so many things for him all in one movie.
Yeah. The great thing about this movie and about Argento in general is he can just like, I'm gonna kill like 3 or 4 gay people in this movie while also saying gay rights. Like he somehow does both of those things. It's super bizarre, but like why not play Tenebrae for Pride Month is what I'm trying to say.
Hell yeah.
There you go.
It is amazing for him to reflect upon himself in these moments with the meta commentary for Peter Neal and everything, but him still at the end of the day put up a middle finger and you're totally happy for it. He's very complicated as a director, and I love it.
There's a really funny quote from Argento in one of the special features on one of the Blu-rays that came out on this. It's an archival thing where he said, I think the film is very good about gay rights because these lesbians hate each other just like regular couples do. And they are killed in the middle of having a domestic dispute, fighting with each other, and it's just, of course, Dario Argento would say that. It's the same thing of saying like it's the same energy as Paul Verhoeven saying that one time, like, how could I hate women? I think they're beautiful. It's like, what do you do with these guys? I mean, just.
You just enjoy.
You just let them cook, and you parse through all of the weird stuff afterwards when you're done. We've had enjoying all of the absurdity.
We've had a similar conversation with Paul Schrader too, where you're just like he's a complicated man, but God can he direct?
What are you doing? Yeah, that's how I feel sometimes.
The Dutch Reformed side always pops out whenever you're ever in doubt about Schrader's sort of moral incoherence, so to speak. He's an incoherent text, to quote Robin Wood.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to lead us into the reductive rating round here on Tenebrae. But this was a very, very solid 4, maybe even a high 4 for me, honestly. I'm excited to go back into it, kind of, knowing the complete shape of it and everything that Argento, because a lot of what I kind of found out about it was, kind of reading up after the fact, finding some interviews with Argento and seeing how he felt about it and what he was putting into it. And I definitely think it's a film that deepens when you realize that he is very, very playfully weaponizing some of the tropes and some of the factors that you would experience in a Giallo film, and doing so to very much very pointedly address so many of the conversations that he helped start around the time of Bird with the Crystal Plumage coming out, and all of the accusations of misogyny and homophobia, and just generally being a kind of homicidal pervert. A lot of people kind of thought of him, and he was like, you know what, I'm going to do all of those things, but I'm also going to do a little bit of I'm going to cover my bases a little bit on all of those things. And to see him do that, but do it where his just sense of his visual grammar is just at the height of what he could do with it, because he was experimenting so much on Suspiria, he was experimenting so much on Inferno, and to come back and be like, I'm going to deliberately do the opposite of those movies to a kind of unsettling and kind of off-putting effect, and also a kind of self-reflexive meta effect as well. And I'm going to gleefully indulge in all of this beautiful artistic staging of a gory roller coaster. But I'm also going to acknowledge that, a gory roller coaster only comes from one place, and that is a sick, sick mind that I have, that my protagonist of my film has, and I think the genius of it is making the protagonist someone who doesn't realize that it's in there. It's subconsciously, it's deep down in there, and Eva Robin plays such an important role of that traumatic flashback of that's that he's repressed, that it's inside him somewhere. And again, to tie that into the fact that the killer he inspires is kind of picking up on this subconscious coded messaging about how much he dislikes women, and he dislikes deviant behavior and queer people, and then it violently and tangibly expresses that, and how that circles all the way back into that the feelings deep inside his book inspired a killer, and then the killer circles back and kind of inspires him. And in that way, it's kind of a rich text, and also a very unpleasant one, and also a very beautifully realized one. And I wouldn't expect anything less of Argento to find liberation in annihilation, the same way that his killers kind of are. And I think it's really cool that he did that. And also you couldn't wrap this up without mentioning the fact that 3 of the members of Goblin did incredible work on the disco soundtrack, which is a little bit different than what some of his other stuff. It's less prog rocky, it's more pulsating. And also, I wanted to note, I looked this up. Apparently, some of these songs actually ended up being Italian club remix songs, and actually did get play through the 1980s in Italian clubs. So every grisly murder set piece you're watching in this movie, he is actually trying to get you dancing like you're at like a Daft Punk show or something like that. And
wonderful.
That element is fantastic. The photography, obviously, by Luciano Tovoli, is absolutely beautiful. And I can't thank Willow enough for that bit of information that he thinks that this is his most accomplished work that he's done in his entire career, because having just seen Passenger on a film print and being absolutely blown away by the look of that film, there's something so funny to me that he's just like, that film is not my greatest, most beautiful work. It is a teenage girl being chased around by a dog for 5 straight minutes, but shot in the weirdest way possible, so that it just feels completely off-putting and inescapable and undeniable. And that's really cool. So yeah, for me, very, very solid 4, but I'm gonna wrap it up there.
It is funny also to think about the fact that crane shot took 3 days to shoot for like 2 to 3 to 4 minutes of footage.
Worth it.
And it's totally worth it. But it is funny, again, just to say that, like, again, the dog is his favorite sequence when it took 3-4 full days to do the crane shot and everything. Just that was
probably, crane shot was probably Argento's moment where he was going to Paul McCarry. He was like, I'm going to get this long tracking shot of the bucket of blood kind of moment. Yeah. But it's these lesbian women having a domestic dispute and getting murdered to disco music.
But yeah. So I would also give it a strong 4. I thought this was incredible. This actually was my first time watching this, surprisingly enough. It was a big one on the watch list, so I'm glad I finally got to. And I do like that it kind of starts with the traditional Giallo setup, but of course he has the meta commentary just kind of sprinkled throughout it. Also, in which you like, it's cool too, because he couldn't really make this film without having the work to reflect upon. So it is watching a movie of a director that could only be made at a certain point in his career, and you can tell with all of just him, dealing with the commentary about the critiques that he's getting, him kind of half agreeing with them and half not, and putting it is strange for a director to almost put like one foot in it and not have both feet firmly inside an idea, and him still kind of wrestle with it and find a balance in which you still understand his point, but he's still going to make the violent film that we're critiquing him on. I think that is really incredible, and only someone with a great control and understanding of what he wants to do would be able to accomplish that. The reflection of himself is very funny, especially when the killer ends up being like a repressed, kind of like a repressed character that has a lust for blood. Is just very funny, given the meta context of this film as well. And Goblin rules. I'll end it on that. Goblin is awesome. So 4 out of 5.
So I'm a formalist, and like, for better or worse, that means this movie gets a 5 for me. I don't. I don't have it in me to care about plot too much. I don't really watch movies for that reason. I watch movies for the way that the camera is moving, the way that the camera is communicating something in a scene, how it ties into character emotions, real film pervert shit. Just terrible things that like you can't talk about with regular people. So like I think that this is
That's why you're here.
I know. I feel at home, I have to say. So it's a 5 for me with the caveat that Suspiria is probably a 6. So like Suspiria breaks the scale. Suspiria is just it's unreal. It's one of those things where like even if you don't give a fuck about movies, like if you showed someone Suspiria, they would be like, "Oh my god, how is this even real?" But I really like Tenebrae. I think that the camera is really active. I think that it beautifully conveys everything that Argento is going for. It constantly contradicts itself, and it's restless in what it wants to communicate, which I think is interesting for Argento because I think that he's fundamentally an artist who is wrangling with himself and his anxieties and his desires and his kinks and his personality. And it shows up in all of his movies. And that's always like the best, most fascinating thing about directors, even when I don't love their films. And there's plenty of later Dario Argento films that are not very good, but this is not one of those movies. This is awesome. And just the cherry on top that Eva Robin sticks a stiletto heel in Peter Neal's throat. It's just in a traumatic flashback sequence on it's great. I love this movie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely 5 red stilettos out of 5. I would say like obviously Suspiria is a whole monument to genre, and Deep Red is also great. They're a lot more contained, even though there are so many crazy things you see in both films that are so effective and iconic. But I kind of always dig the sort of unwieldy nature of when an artist has sort of reached both certain level of anxiety, but also the confidence to feel like he can spill all of this into a film, whether it's due to overconfidence or not. I always am fascinated when directors just let things go loose and so unwieldy like this. And yeah, it's so impressive to watch this, even though like again you're not really going by the logic of the sort of plot mechanics that you often would expect in genre film. But I also want to obviously give Eva Robin her flowers. In looking at her filmography, like she obviously was in those Lou Ferrigno Hercules movies, and while that was certainly sort of like a big deal, and it was also something obviously happening at the time with the Arnold Conan films and all that. She did try to move up in respectability. She was in this movie by Patrick Conrad, who's Dutch, called Mascara. And basically, the film was shown at Directors Fortnight at Cannes in 1987. And some films included in that section included Laurie Anderson's Home of the Brave concert film, Shadows of Paradise by Aki Kaurismäki, Rita Sue and Bob 2 by Alan Clark, and John Waters' Maid Wand. But unfortunately, Mascara is almost a glorified Law and Order episode in many ways, right down to the fact that Ava's role in the film is basically she becomes the corpse. Although almost is treated as this sort of tragic martyr figure in the film. Willow has also seen it, but it's one of those films that got booed at Cannes, basically because during the scene before she is murdered, she goes into a state of undress with the lead actor of the film, Michael Sarrazin. and it reveals her genitals. And he basically has a trans panic, even though it does also seem clear in the film that he's also somebody you would categorize as a chaser. And to further complicate, stereotype matters, he's also a cop. But yeah, basically.
Can I just say one thing, Caden?
Yeah.
Yeah. Regarding Eva Robin's genitals, weird segue, I know, but she was
at the end. Get it in there.
She was really proud of the fact that she never had surgery. She spoke about this. She spoke about this openly. She didn't believe that trans people needed surgery in order to confirm their own gender. She was really open about this, which, not every trans person feels the same way, but the fact that she was speaking about that as early as the 80s is really significant. Yeah. And it's available in the films that she's in. She's very openly like, I'll do a full frontal scene. This happens multiple times in movies that she's in.
Yeah, and I'm only speaking to it because of the contrast in reaction. Obviously, you see that in Eva Man, where she's full frontal and completely unapologetic about it, and the film loves her for it. Although, again, who knows with the subtitle situation. But, basically what I'm trying to say is the film was almost a precursor to The Crying Game in terms of the fact that the film's legacy was the audience revulsion. Because I don't even think Patrick Conrad was in any way disrespectful or was trying to other her. It's just that due to the plot mechanics in the film, she's essentially killed because the guy has a trans panic against her. But the film doesn't. In fact, I would say she's shot very beautifully in the film as this performer. But yeah, essentially that was her one quick attempt at being seen in the mainstream art house circles, and the film is sort of taken like a joke. And again, it's not the best film. And I would say Will and I are kind of put off by it in terms of, again, being more of a TV movie quality. And despite the fact that Charlotte Rampling is in the film, she might as well be sleepwalking through that film. But just wanted to say, I feel like people dropped the ball on that film.
And they dropped the ball on her. Like, obviously, with the two films we've talked about, with the two films we talked about, you get the sense that she should have been a much bigger star than she was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. She just has that quality to her the moment you see her. It's kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, and I just want to actually directly quote from a trans magazine published at that time called Fanfare Magazine. Just goes to prove that the world isn't ready for us yet, was the editorial regarding film Mascara by Patrick Conrad being booed. Again, not to be confused with the Roberta Findlay film of the same name. This one played at Cannes, but also gained infamy for playing at Cannes. And is mostly forgotten, I would say, which is a shame because Eva Robin deserves so much more.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful note to end on, I think.
For sure. And everyone should go check out her filmography and go down it. I mean, I feel like I want to go see these Lou Ferrigno Hercules movies now because I'm not taking the Lou Ferrigno pill either. I'll do both at the same time. But that being said, I think that is going to wrap it up for this week. Once again, that was Eva Man from 1980 and Tenebrae from 1982. Thanks so much to Willow and Caden for coming on and for bringing these films and for letting us be a little bit of a bonus feature to their amazing new book, which we will have a link to in the description of this episode, and that you should absolutely be buying and you should absolutely be reading up and obviously attending any screenings that they're putting on near you, whether you're in New York or whether you're in Toronto. But Caden and Willow, is there anything else that either of you would like to plug? Do you have any personal writing or anything else other than, I mean, you can also just once again promote the book as well, but this is usually part of the show where we have guests, drop anything they're up to. In addition to the ones that you mentioned in New York and Toronto, we also have some events in Los Angeles this month. And we have one event at the Jacob Burns Center in August planned right now. And we also have a virtual event with the Olympia
in Olympia, Washington, that we're running a trans film festival this weekend, which we're going to have an author talk there. Feel free to join us. It's going to be held over Zoom. And I think that's everything that we have planned in the immediate future, right?
We have Cherished Books and More, which is also another virtual event moderated by the great Millie Jaterko, who is a podcaster, but also obviously did a lot of great programming work with Turner Classic Movies for a number of years, and also the author of a book on cult films. The events, I do believe we're trying to work on something with Whammy Analog Media in Los Angeles. We have a special secret screening, which is kind of, if you see the promo, it's really an open secret as far as what the secret film will be. But we also have something with Vidiots with Skylight Books on July 18th. The Whammy event secret screening is the following day on Friday. Then with Los Angeles Film Forum, more experimental on Sunday the 21st. We're also trying to do as far as another event with Whammy as far as streaming, because while we do love working and collaborating with many of these theaters, we've also run into some funky rights issues or films that don't necessarily get regularly played in repertory cinemas. So we're trying to cook something up there and also kind of do a whole sort of various platter of what the book can bring beyond just one certain kind of film. So we hope we can lock that down and have a little fun streaming with Whammy Analog Media.
Cool.
Very cool.
That's awesome.
We can definitely recommend checking all of that out, and we will have relevant links in the description of this episode.
I would also like to just plug my Patreon, where I'm writing pretty consistently, even through this book tour. I write about horror movies over there frequently, so if you liked what I talked about here, please consider being a subscriber. I think if you like this podcast, you'll probably like what I do over there on a week-to-week basis.
Hell yeah, go do that too. For our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time, tying in, because there is we love to have an excuse when there's a new movie out that's relevant to stuff we like to talk about, to take advantage of that. There is, for some reason, there is a sequel to the movie Twister coming out, and I don't particularly love Twister, but I do love Jan Dubont, and I do love Jan Dubont, the director, in a little movie called Speed. That is why we are going to use this as a great excuse to talk about Jan Dubont, and we're going to do an episode on both Speed and Twister and talk about taking over the directing reins and delivering some 90s thrillers. We also just did Blue Velvet recently, so we did have Dennis Hopper on the minds. We were, Speed was part on the mind there as well.
And of course, we love Keanu. Come on now.
That's right too. So that is going to be what we're going to be talking about next week over on the Patreon for anyone who's interested. But then in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be back with another special guest where we're going to be doing a double feature once again of two films I have not seen. One of them is called Rat Fink, which I'm not
the Dennis Stickler film.
I think that it might be. Let me double check this.
I feel a mutual friend of ours, Katie Stebbins, sort of hyped up that film up for us.
Yes, that's exactly who's coming on. So we are talking Rat Fink.
Oh wow, awesome!
That's awesome.
Okay.
Katie is joining us, and she was meaning to have her on for a little while, and that was the main film that she wanted to bring up, and then she is pairing that with Inside Daisy. Clover from 1965, directed by Robert Mulligan, starring Natalie Wood and Christopher Plummer and Robert Redford. So that is one crazy cast. Roddy McDowell's in there too. God damn, there's a lot of people in that one. So
great Hollywood burn type of movie.
Hell yeah. I'm excited. So that's what we're going to do in 2 weeks' time over on the main feed with a special guest. But that is going to wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.